What happens when a powerful CEO hears her assistant confess his love while she's pretending to be unconscious? Victoria Hale built an empire by keeping people at arm's length, but one devastating car crash and a whispered confession she was never meant to hear will shatter every wall she's ever built. This is a story about ambition, second chances, and discovering that the most important success might be the one you never planned for. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story reaches. The conference call had run 20 minutes over schedule, nothing unusual for Victoria Hale's Fridays. She sat in the back of the town car, laptop balanced on her knees, reviewing quarterly projections while the city blurred past her window. Numbers danced across the screen in neat columns, each one representing another conquest, another competitor left behind. Another quarter where Hale Dynamics had exceeded expectations. "Daniel, pull up the Henderson file," Victoria said, without looking up, her voice carrying that particular edge of authority that had become her trademark over 10 years of building her company from nothing into a tech industry powerhouse. Daniel Carter shifted in the seat beside her, tablet already in hand. "Already queued up. I flagged the contract terms you wanted to review before Monday's meeting." Victoria's manicured nail traced down a column of figures. "Revenue projections are conservative. Tell Henderson's team we're expecting 8% growth minimum, not 6. "Noted." Daniel's fingers moved across his tablet, taking notes in that precise, methodical way he approached everything. After 5 years as Victoria's executive assistant, he'd learned to anticipate her needs before she voiced them, a skill that made him indispensable, and if she was being honest with herself, easy to take for granted. The car merged onto the elevated highway, rain beginning to spatter against the windows. Victoria finally glanced up, noticing the weather for the first time. Dark clouds pressed down on the city like a bruise. "What time is Emma's thing tonight?" she asked, returning to her laptop. "Her dress rehearsal starts at 6:30, Daniel said, checking his watch. "I'll need to leave the office by 5:45. Victoria made a non-committal sound. She'd learned over the years that Daniel's daughter had activities, school plays, parent-teacher conferences, birthday parties. They existed in the periphery of her awareness, important to Daniel and therefore requiring accommodation in his schedule, but not something she paid much attention to beyond ensuring they didn't interfere with critical business needs. The Meyer contract still needs... The impact came like the end of the world. One moment, Victoria was mid-sentence. The next, the universe exploded into chaos. Metal shrieked. Glass shattered into a million glittering diamonds. Her body jerked violently against the seatbelt as the car spun, tumbling like a toy thrown by an angry child. The laptop flew from her hands. Papers erupted into the air like startled birds. Time fractured into disjointed snapshots. The driver's shout cut short, Daniel's arm thrown across her chest in an instinctive protective gesture. The sickening crunch of steel folding inward, the world rotating in impossible directions as sky and ground exchanged places. Then darkness. Not gradual, but absolute. A switch flipped from light to nothing. Pain dragged Victoria back to consciousness. It arrived slowly, a dull throb that sharpened with each shallow breath. Her ribs felt like they'd been kicked by something large and merciless. When she tried to move, fresh agony lanced through her side. Don't move. Assess first. The thought emerged from years of training herself to stay calm under pressure. Victoria kept her eyes closed, taking inventory. Her hands responded when she concentrated on them. Her legs, though trapped, registered sensation. The metallic taste in her mouth was probably from biting her tongue. Everything hurt, but she was alive. The smell hit her next. Gasoline, acrid and terrifying. Burnt rubber. Something electrical sparking nearby. The rain had become a steady drumming on what remained of the car's roof, drops finding their way through torn metal to land cold on her face. Voices filtered through the ringing in her ears, distant shouts, someone screaming, sirens wailing still far away but approaching, and then, very close, labored breathing. "Victoria," Daniel's voice, rough with panic. "Victoria, please, can you hear me?" She wanted to answer, but something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the head injury. Her thoughts felt sluggish, disconnected. Or maybe it was the raw desperation in his tone, so different from his usual professional composure, that made her pause. I'm going to get you out. Daniel's voice came from her right, accompanied by the sound of him struggling with something metal. Just hold on. Please hold on. Victoria felt pressure on her hand, Daniel's fingers finding hers in the wreckage, holding tight. His hand was shaking. The ambulance is coming, he said, and she could hear him fighting to keep his voice steady. I called them. They're coming. You're going to be fine. You have to be fine. The rain intensified, a downpour now. Victoria could hear Daniel moving, trying to create space in the crushed interior. Metal groaned. He swore under his breath, something she'd never heard him do in 5 years. I can't, his voice broke. I can't move this part. Your side is completely... Victoria, I'm so sorry. I should have checked the driver's credentials better. I should have insisted on our regular driver. This is my fault. Not your fault, Victoria thought, but still didn't speak. Something in his voice held her silent. Daniel's thumb moved across the back of her hand, a gentle, repetitive motion that seemed unconscious. Emma would be devastated if anything happened to you, he said quietly. She made you that card last week, remember? For your birthday. She spent 3 hours on it. Victoria did remember. A homemade card with glitter that had gotten everywhere, depicting what Emma apparently believed Victoria looked like. Cape included. The best boss ever, it had declared in uneven crayon letters. Victoria had thanked Daniel politely and set it aside, meaning to throw it away later, but somehow never getting around to it. It was probably still buried under papers on her desk. She asks about you all the time, Daniel continued, his voice taking on a faraway quality. Wants to know what you're like, if you're as smart as I say you are, if you really built your whole company yourself. He laughed, a broken sound. I tell her you're the strongest person I know, that you're brave and brilliant and you don't let anything stop you. The sirens were getting closer. Victoria could hear multiple vehicles now. Help was coming. She should open her eyes, let Daniel know she was conscious, but his hand was still holding hers, and he was still talking, and something about the moment felt fragile, like moving would shatter whatever was happening. I've never told you this, Daniel said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The rain and distant sirens should have drowned him out, but somehow Victoria heard every word with perfect clarity. I've never told anyone, really. Emma's too young to understand, and who else would I tell? He took a shaky breath. I'm in love with you, Victoria. The words landed in the space between them like a grenade with the pin pulled, dangerous and irreversible. Victoria's entire body went rigid, but she forced herself to remain still, to keep her breathing even. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs. I know it's inappropriate, Daniel continued, and she could hear the anguish in his voice now, the words spilling out like a confession he'd held back for too long. I know you'd never... God, if you knew, you'd probably fire me, and you'd be right to. I'm your employee. I have no business feeling this way. His grip on her hand tightened. But I can't help it. I've tried. After Sarah died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I was just numb, going through the motions for Emma's sake. And then you... His voice caught. You barely knew me. I was just the new assistant. But when Sarah's funeral happened, you sent that massive flower arrangement. You gave me 2 weeks off with full pay. And when I came back, you never once made me feel like I was broken. You just let me work. Let me focus on something that wasn't grief. Victoria remembered. She'd considered it basic human decency, nothing more. An employee had lost his spouse. The company should respond appropriately. She'd delegated the flowers to her then secretary and approved the leave without much thought. I started noticing things, Daniel said, the way you solve problems, how you never ask anyone to do something you wouldn't do yourself. You stayed until midnight helping the design team meet that deadline last year, remember? Everyone else had given up, but you rolled up your sleeves and figured it out. The rain was letting up slightly. In the distance, Victoria could hear vehicle doors slamming, voices shouting coordinates. The emergency responders were organizing. You scare the hell out of most people, Daniel continued with a weak laugh. They think you're cold, ruthless, but I've seen you approve every single one of the team's vacation requests, even when it made scheduling a nightmare. I've seen you anonymously donate to the Junior Developers Medical Fund. I've watched you mentor young women in the industry who remind you of yourself. He sees too much, Victoria thought. He pays too much attention. I know you don't think about me that way, Daniel said, his voice growing softer. How could you? I'm just the guy who manages your calendar and makes sure you eat lunch. I'm not on your level. I don't have an MBA or a Stanford degree. I'm just a single dad trying to give his daughter a decent life. The emergency vehicles were very close now. Their flashing lights created strange patterns across the inside of the wrecked car, red and blue streaks through the rain. But lying here, thinking you might... Daniel's voice broke completely. He was quiet for a long moment, struggling. When he spoke again, his words were barely audible. If something happens to you, I needed you to know. Even if you can't hear me, even if I'm just talking to myself, I needed to say it once. He leaned closer. Victoria could feel his breath against her forehead. I love you, Victoria Hale. I love your brilliant, complicated, beautiful mind. I love how dedicated you are to everything you do. I love that you pretend not to care, but you care about everything deeply. I love... Over here! A shout from outside the car cut through his words. We've got 2 people trapped! Daniel pulled back abruptly. They're here, he said, his voice immediately shifting back toward something resembling composure. You're going to be okay. Help is here. His hand left hers, and Victoria felt the loss of contact like a physical thing. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Voices surrounded the car, professional and efficient. The emergency responders had arrived, bringing equipment and expertise and the promise of rescue. But Victoria lay there in the twisted metal, eyes still closed, heart racing, mind reeling from what she'd just heard. Daniel Carter loved her. Her assistant, her reliable, efficient, perpetually professional assistant, was in love with her. And the most terrifying part wasn't his confession. It was the small, insistent voice in her head whispering that maybe, just maybe, she'd been noticing him too. The extraction took 45 minutes. Victoria had opened her eyes after the first responders began working, but she hadn't spoken to Daniel about what she'd heard. Hadn't spoken to him at all beyond necessary responses to medical questions. Daniel had escaped with minor cuts and bruises. He'd been thrown partially out of the car during the crash, which the paramedics said probably saved him from more serious injury. Victoria watched them bandage a gash on his forearm, while firefighters worked to cut away the metal pinning her legs. She couldn't look at him directly. Every time she tried, her mind replayed his words. I love you, Victoria Hale. The driver, their regular driver, had called in sick that morning, she learned, had been killed instantly. A drunk driver had run a red light and T-boned them at 60 miles per hour. Wrong place, wrong time, a random tragedy that could have ended very differently. When they finally pulled Victoria from the wreckage, Daniel was there, hovering at the paramedics' elbows despite their attempts to move him back. I'm her emergency contact, he said firmly when they tried to make him stay behind. I'm coming with her. Victoria wanted to correct him. Her emergency contact should be her lawyer or perhaps her CFO, but the words wouldn't come. She let them load her into the ambulance, let Daniel climb in behind her. The paramedic, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, began taking Victoria's vitals. You're very lucky, she said. 3 broken ribs, probably a concussion, some lacerations, but nothing that won't heal. The driver? Victoria asked, though she already knew. The paramedic's expression answered the question. Victoria closed her eyes. She felt Daniel's hand find hers again. This time she didn't pull away. The ambulance swayed through traffic, sirens clearing their path. Victoria kept her eyes closed, but she was intensely aware of Daniel beside her. His presence had always been constant, part of the landscape of her daily life, like her morning coffee or the view from her office window. She'd never really thought about him as a person separate from his function. When had that changed for him? When had he looked at her and seen something other than his employer? More importantly, and this was the question that made her breath catch despite the oxygen mask, when had she started looking forward to seeing him each morning? When had his quiet competence become something she relied on not just professionally, but personally? When had just the assistant become the person whose opinion she trusted most? We're almost there, the paramedic said gently. Victoria opened her eyes and found Daniel watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, or perhaps had never let herself recognize. Worry, yes, but underneath it, something tender and unguarded that made her chest tight. He'd confessed his love thinking she was unconscious, thinking he was speaking to the void. Now she carried his secret, and he had no idea. The ambulance pulled into the hospital bay. Doors opened. Medical staff swarmed. Victoria was transferred to a gurney and wheeled inside, the fluorescent lights harsh after the darkness. Daniel walked beside her until a nurse stopped him at the examination room door. Family only beyond this point. Daniel started. He can stay, Victoria said. Her voice came out rougher than intended. The nurse looked between them, then shrugged. Your call. They spent the next 3 hours in the emergency department. X-rays confirmed the broken ribs. The CT scan showed a mild concussion. The lacerations required stitches but weren't serious. Mostly, Victoria had been extraordinarily lucky. Through it all, Daniel stayed. He answered questions about the accident. He called Victoria's lawyer and CFO to handle the immediate business implications. He fielded calls from concerned board members. And when Emma's school called his phone, it was past 6:30, he'd missed the dress rehearsal. He stepped out to the hallway, and Victoria could hear his voice through the door, explaining to his daughter that there had been an accident, but everyone was okay. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I'll make the next one, I promise. No, Victoria's okay. Just some bruises. We'll talk about it when I get home. I love you too. Be good for Mrs. Morrison. When he came back, he looked exhausted. His shirt was torn and blood-stained. The bandage on his arm had started to seep through. He had a bruise blooming along his jaw. You should go, Victoria said. It was past 8 o'clock. Emma needs you. Emma's fine. Mrs. Morrison can stay late. Daniel sat in the plastic chair beside her bed. I'm not leaving until they discharge you. That's not necessary. Victoria, he met her eyes directly. I was in that car too. I need to know you're okay before I go anywhere. The honesty in his voice made her look away first. A doctor came in around 9:30 with discharge papers and a prescription for pain medication. Victoria was free to go home with instructions to rest and follow up with her primary care physician in a week. You'll need someone to stay with you tonight, the doctor said, signing forms. Concussion protocol. Someone should check on you every few hours. I'll call my housekeeper, Victoria said automatically. Mrs. Chen is in Portland visiting her sister, Daniel reminded her gently. She won't be back until Monday. Victoria frowned. Right. She'd approved that time off weeks ago. Then I'll stay at a hotel. They can send someone. Or you could stay at my place. Daniel said it casually, but Victoria saw the tension in his shoulders. We have a guest room. Emma would love it, and I can keep an eye on you properly. Every professional instinct Victoria possessed screamed that this was a terrible idea. Staying at her assistant's apartment crossed approximately 15 different boundaries. It was inappropriate. It would send the wrong message. It was... Okay, she heard herself say. Daniel blinked. Okay? Just for tonight, Victoria amended quickly. Until I can make other arrangements. Something flickered across Daniel's face. Surprise, maybe, or something more complicated. Okay, let me go pull the car around. The car is totaled, Daniel. Right. He laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. I'll call an Uber. 20 minutes later, they were in the back of a sedan heading across town. Victoria watched the city slide past, everything familiar, yet somehow different. People walked dogs. Couples held hands. Life continued, oblivious to the fact that Victoria's world had tilted on its axis. She could still hear Daniel's voice in her head. I love you, Victoria Hale. What was she supposed to do with that information? Daniel's apartment was in a modest building in a neighborhood Victoria rarely had reason to visit. Not run down, but far from the luxury high-rises where she and most of her executives lived. The kind of place where families raised kids and people knew their neighbors' names. Sorry about the mess, Daniel said as he unlocked the door. We weren't expecting company. The apartment was small but warm. Lived in. A couch with throw pillows that didn't match. Bookshelves stuffed with paperbacks and children's books. A coffee table covered in crayons and coloring books. And covering nearly every available wall space, Emma's artwork. Drawings of princesses and dragons, finger paintings and wild explosions of color. A family portrait showing two stick figures labeled Daddy and Emma, with a cat that Daniel apparently didn't own. The refrigerator was a gallery of spelling tests and gold star stickers. It was chaos. It was cluttered. It was absolutely nothing like Victoria's carefully curated penthouse, with its minimalist design and its sterile perfection. It was wonderful. Victoria! A small tornado in princess pajamas came barreling out of a bedroom, followed by an older woman wiping her hands on a dish towel. Emma, careful, Daniel started, but his daughter had already attached herself to Victoria's legs in an enthusiastic hug that made Victoria's ribs scream in protest. Sorry, Emma said, pulling back. Daddy said you got hurt in a car accident. Are you okay? Do you need medicine? I can get you a Band-Aid. I have Princess Elsa Band-Aids. I'm okay, Victoria managed, looking down at the gap-toothed smile beaming up at her. Emma had Daniel's eyes, warm brown, expressive. Her dark hair was in lopsided pigtails that suggested self-styling. Emma, this is Mrs. Morrison, Daniel said, gesturing to the woman. She stays with Emma sometimes when I have to work late. Nice to meet you, the woman said warmly. Daniel called and explained the situation. Poor dear, you look like you've been through the wars. Thank you for staying late, Daniel said. Oh, nonsense. Emma and I had a lovely time. We made cookies. Mrs. Morrison gathered her purse and coat. You call if you need anything else. And young lady, she turned to Emma, bedtime is in 30 minutes. No arguments. Okay, Emma agreed readily, already turning back to Victoria. You can have my room. I'll sleep on the couch. Emma, no, Daniel started. Victoria's using the guest room, Daniel said firmly. We don't have a guest room, Emma said with an 8-year-old's brutal honesty. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Right. Okay. Emma, you stay in your room. Victoria can have my room, and I'll take the couch. Daniel, I'm not taking your bed, Victoria began. Victoria, you have broken ribs and a concussion. You're taking the bed. Discussion over. He used the same tone Victoria had heard him use when shutting down difficult clients. It was oddly attractive. She was too tired to argue. Fine. Thank you. Emma grabbed Victoria's hand, gentler this time. Come on, I'll show you Daddy's room. He has boring adult books, but some of them have pictures. Victoria let herself be led down a short hallway. Daniel's bedroom was as modest as the rest of the apartment. A queen bed with a blue comforter, a dresser that had seen better days, a nightstand with a lamp, and a framed photo of a woman holding a baby, Sarah and Emma, Victoria realized. Daniel's late wife. That's my mama, Emma said, following Victoria's gaze. She died when I was 3. I don't remember her much, but Daddy says she was beautiful and smart like you. Victoria's throat tightened. I'm sure she was. Daddy says you're the strongest person he knows, Emma continued, bouncing on the bed. Are you really a CEO? That means you're like the boss of everyone? More or less. Cool. Emma considered this. When I grow up, I want to be an astronaut, or maybe a vet, or a chef. I haven't decided yet. You have time, Victoria said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Emma, teeth brushed, face washed, bed. Daniel appeared in the doorway with a pile of clean towels. Victoria needs to rest, but I want to talk to her. Tomorrow. Bed. Now. Emma huffed but obeyed, sliding off the bed. At the door, she turned back. I'm glad you're okay, Victoria. Daddy was really scared when he called. I heard his voice shake. Then she was gone, leaving Victoria alone with Daniel in the small bedroom. I put out fresh towels, Daniel said, setting them on the dresser. Bathroom's across the hall. There's extra toothbrushes in the cabinet, and I'll set an alarm to check on you every few hours like the doctor said. Thank you. Victoria's voice came out softer than she intended. Daniel lingered in the doorway. In the warm light of the bedroom lamp, the events of the day seemed to catch up with him all at once. His shoulders sagged. The careful composure he'd maintained through the accident, the hospital, the phone calls. It all cracked. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? The driver, the accident, that you're hurt, that... He gestured vaguely. All of it. None of that was your fault. I'm your assistant. I'm supposed to handle these things. Make sure everything runs smoothly. His jaw tightened. I should have double-checked the replacement driver's credentials. I should have... Daniel! Victoria stood, ignoring the protest from her ribs. Stop, please. He met her eyes, and the anguish in them made her breath catch. We could have died today, he said simply. Both of us. Emma could have lost both parents. But we didn't. We're fine. Are we? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Victoria wasn't sure she wanted to unpack. They stood there, 3 feet apart in the small bedroom, and Victoria became acutely aware of everything she'd been trying not to think about since the accident. The confession she'd heard, the way her heart had raced at his words, the fact that standing here now, looking at him, really looking at him for perhaps the first time, she felt something shift in her chest. Daniel Carter wasn't just her assistant. He was a good man, a devoted father, someone who'd loved and lost and rebuilt his life with quiet strength. Someone who saw past her armor to the person underneath. And she'd been too focused on profit margins and market share to notice. "You should rest," Daniel said, breaking the moment. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." He turned to leave. "Daniel." He paused, looking back. Victoria knew she should let him go, should maintain the professional distance they'd always kept, should pretend she'd heard nothing in that wrecked car. But the words came anyway. "I heard you. In the car. When you thought I was unconscious." She watched his face go pale. "I heard everything you said." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at her, horror and mortification warring across his features. "Victoria, His voice cracked. "I never meant... You weren't supposed to... I'm so sorry. I'll resign tomorrow. I understand completely. This is completely inappropriate and..." "Stop," Victoria said quietly. He fell silent, looking like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him. "I don't want your resignation," Victoria continued. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I want to know if you meant it." Daniel's laugh was broken. "Of course I meant it. God, Victoria, I've been in love with you for 3 years. But I would never have told you. I know it's wrong. I know I'm just the assistant and you're..." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. Victoria took a breath, moderating her tone. "Don't diminish yourself like that. You're not just anything." "I'm realistic," Daniel said. "Look at you. Look at what you've built. And then look at me. Single dad, barely scraping by, living in a 2-bedroom apartment. We're from different worlds." "Maybe." Victoria's ribs ached, her head throbbed, and every professional instinct she possessed screamed that this conversation was a mistake. But she was tired, so tired of always making the safe choice. "But sitting in that car today, thinking I might die, you want to know what I regretted?" Daniel waited, barely breathing. "Not all the deals I didn't close, not the competitors I didn't crush, not the money I didn't make." Victoria's voice dropped. "I regretted that the only person I could think of, the only person I wanted beside me, was someone I'd never let myself see as anything but an employee." The words fell between them like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward. "What are you saying?" Daniel whispered. "I'm saying I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's just adrenaline from the accident or something more, but I do know that when you were holding my hand in that wreckage, I felt safer than I have in years." Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, immediately regretting it when her ribs protested. "I'm saying maybe I've been noticing you too, and I was too much of a coward to admit it." Daniel crossed the room in 3 strides. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands raised but not quite making contact, as if she might disappear if he reached for her. "Tell me I'm not imagining this," he said roughly. "Tell me you're really standing here saying what I think you're saying." "I'm terrified," Victoria admitted. "Of this. Of you, of what happens on Monday morning when we have to go back to work. Of screwing up your life and Emma's life because I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be human." The confession tore out of her. "I've spent 10 years building walls, Daniel. I don't know how to let someone in. I don't know if I even can." "Then we'll figure it out together," Daniel said. His hands finally settled on her shoulders, gentle and warm. "Victoria, I don't need you to have all the answers. I just need you to be willing to try." She looked up at him, really looked at him. At the hope and fear warring in his expression. At the careful way he touched her, like she was precious. At the man who'd quietly loved her while expecting nothing in return. "I'm not good at this," she warned him. "I know. I'm a workaholic with control issues and a reputation for being cold." "I know that too. Emma deserves better than..." "Emma deserves to see her father happy," Daniel interrupted gently. And she deserves to know that strong, brilliant women like you exist in the world. You're already her hero, Victoria. She's been asking me for months to invite you over for dinner. That surprised her. She has? She wants to show you her rock collection and make you try her famous spaghetti, which is really just pasta with butter and parmesan. A smile tugged at his mouth. She's been planning the menu for weeks, just in case I ever got brave enough to ask. Victoria's chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. You were going to ask me to dinner? Eventually, maybe. In another 5 years when I built up enough courage. Daniel's thumb moved across her shoulder in a gentle circle. Or maybe never. I'd convinced myself that keeping you in my life as a friend and employer was better than risking everything and losing you completely. And now? Now we almost died, and I'm done being a coward. He cupped her face gently, his touch careful around the bruises forming on her cheek. Now I'm standing here telling you that I love you, Victoria Hale. Completely. Terrifyingly. With full knowledge that you're brilliant and difficult and married to your work. And I'm asking you, begging you, to give us a chance. Victoria's breath caught. In her entire life, no one had ever looked at her the way Daniel was looking at her now. Like she was a miracle. Like she was worth fighting for. Like she was more than her accomplishments and her net worth. Like she was just Victoria, and that was enough. One condition, she whispered, anything. If this doesn't work, if we try and it falls apart, you don't lose your job. We find a way to make it work professionally, whatever happens personally. Victorious, I need to know you're protected, both of you and Emma. Her voice was fierce. Promise me. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, careful of her injuries. I promise. But you're wrong about one thing. What? This is going to work. His voice was low and certain. Because I've been falling in love with you for 3 years, and you've apparently been falling for me too without realizing it. And that kind of foundation, that's stronger than you think. Victoria closed her eyes, breathing him in. He smelled like hospital antiseptic and coffee and something uniquely Daniel. Safe, solid, real. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. Then I guess we're both idiots. Daniel laughed, and the sound of it, warm and surprised and hopeful, made something in Victoria's chest crack open. She'd spent 10 years building an empire. 10 years being strong and untouchable, and alone. Maybe it was time to try something different. Stay with me tonight, she said quietly. Not like that. Just stay. I don't want to be alone. Daniel pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Are you sure? No, but I'm asking anyway. He smiled then, a real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger. Okay, let me go check on Emma and grab some blankets. Daniel, he paused at the door. Thank you for being there today, she gestured helplessly. Everything. Always, he said simply. Then he was gone, leaving Victoria alone in his bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, her body aching and her mind reeling. Outside the window, the city continued its endless motion. In the living room, she could hear Daniel talking to Emma in a low voice, the sound of it comforting in its ordinariness. This wasn't how she'd expected her day to end. This morning, she'd been Victoria Hale, CEO, untouchable and alone in her tower. Tonight, she was sitting in her assistant's bedroom, her carefully constructed walls in rubble around her, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. Questions, complications. The board would have opinions. HR would need to be informed. There would be policies and procedures and 100 reasons why this was a bad idea. But tonight she was just going to let herself feel. Let herself want. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the most important success wasn't the one she'd planned for. Daniel returned with blankets and pillows, setting up a makeshift bed on the floor beside his bed. What are you doing? Victoria asked. Doctor said someone needs to check on you every few hours. Easier if I'm right here. Daniel, the floor is fine. I've slept in worse places. He arranged the pillows with quick efficiency. Besides, Emma sometimes has nightmares. I'm used to sleeping on her floor. Victoria watched him, this man who'd rearranged his entire life around his daughter, who stayed late at the office without complaint but never missed a school event, who'd loved her silently for 3 years while expecting nothing in return. "Lie with me?" she said impulsively. Daniel froze. "Victoria, just to sleep, She struggled for words. "I don't want to be alone, and the bed is big enough." After a moment, Daniel nodded. He kicked off his shoes and carefully climbed onto the bed beside her, staying on top of the covers, while Victoria was beneath them. The mattress dipped under his weight. They lay there in the dim light, not touching but aware of every inch between them. "This is crazy," Victoria said to the ceiling. "Completely insane," Daniel agreed. "We're going to regret this in the morning." "Probably. Everything's going to be complicated." "Definitely." Victoria turned her head to look at him. Daniel was staring at the ceiling, but she could see the smile tugging at his mouth. "Why are you smiling?" she asked. "Because you're here, in my bed, and you asked me to stay." He turned to meet her eyes. "Because this morning I woke up thinking I'd spend another day pretending I didn't love you, and tonight I'm lying here knowing you feel something too. Even if it's small, even if it's just the beginning, it's more than I ever let myself hope for." Victoria's throat tightened. She reached out slowly, finding his hand in the space between them, their fingers intertwined. "I can't promise this will work," she said quietly. "I know. I can't promise I won't screw it up. I know that too. I can't even promise I won't panic tomorrow and try to pretend this never happened." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Then I'll be there to remind you it did, and that it was real, and that you're allowed to want something just for yourself." They lay there in the darkness, hands linked, two people who'd spent years circling each other, finally allowing themselves to come together. Outside, the city hummed its endless song. Down the hall, Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her father's careful world was transforming. And in the small bedroom, Victoria Hale, CEO, empire builder, woman who'd conquered every challenge through sheer will. Let herself be vulnerable. Let herself be scared. Let herself fall asleep beside a man who loved her, not for what she'd accomplished, but for who she was. It was, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. It was also, possibly, the bravest. Victoria woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of muffled laughter filtering through the bedroom door. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The light coming through the curtains hit at the wrong angle. The sheets smelled like laundry detergent instead of the lavender sachets her housekeeper used. Then memory crashed back. The accident, the hospital, Daniel's confession, her own reckless admission in this very room. She turned her head carefully, mindful of her bruised ribs, and found the other side of the bed empty, but still warm. Daniel had been there when she'd fallen asleep, his hand holding hers. At some point during the night, he must have moved to the floor, true to his original plan. Her phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. Victoria reached for it and immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through her side. 17 missed calls, 43 emails, 26 text messages. The board was in full panic mode about the accident. Her CFO wanted an emergency meeting. 3 different reporters had somehow gotten her personal number and were asking for statements. The phone felt heavy in her hand. This was her life. Conference calls and crisis management and constant demands on her time and attention. How was she supposed to fit Daniel and Emma into this chaos? A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Victoria, you awake?" Daniel's voice, cautious. "Yes." "Come in." He opened the door carrying a tray, and the sight of him in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, barefoot and slightly rumpled from sleep, made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with broken ribs. This was Daniel outside of tailored suits and professional distance. This was Daniel in his natural habitat, and he was devastatingly real. "Emma insisted on making you breakfast," he said, setting the tray carefully across her lap. "I tried to supervise, but she has very strong opinions about pancake-to-syrup ratios." Victoria looked down at the plate. 3 pancakes swimming in what had to be a quarter cup of syrup, accompanied by slightly burnt bacon and a glass of orange juice. A paper napkin had been folded into something that might have been attempting to be a swan. On the tray's edge, a small vase held 3 dandelions. She picked those from the courtyard, Daniel said, following her gaze. Apparently they're your favorites now. I've never mentioned my favorite flower. She decided for you. His mouth quirked. Emma's like that. Can I come in now? Emma's voice carried from the hallway, impatient and eager. It's Victoria's call, Daniel said, looking at her questioningly. Victoria should say no, should maintain some boundary between her private crisis and this little girl who is already too invested in her presence. Should protect Emma from the inevitable disappointment when Victoria's carefully ordered world reasserted itself and this strange interlude ended. Of course, she heard herself say instead. Emma bounced into the room in pink pajamas covered in cartoon astronauts, her hair an explosion of bedhead tangles. She climbed onto the foot of the bed with the unself-conscious ease of a child who'd never learned to doubt her welcome. Do you like it? I made the pancakes myself. Well, Daddy helped with the hot parts, but I did all the mixing and I let you have extra syrup because you got hurt, and hurt people need extra sweet things. The logic is sound, Victoria said seriously, cutting into a pancake. She took a bite. It was simultaneously undercooked in the middle and crispy around the edges, and absolutely the best thing she'd tasted in recent memory. It's perfect. Thank you, Emma. The little girl beamed. Daddy said you have to rest today because of your ribs. Do you want to watch movies with me? I have The Lion King and Moana and Frozen, but Daddy says I've watched Frozen too many times, and the songs are driving him crazy. I can hear you, Daniel said mildly, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. You're supposed to, Emma shot back. Then to Victoria, he doesn't appreciate the musical genius of Let It Go. I appreciate it at reasonable volumes and frequencies, Daniel corrected, not at 7 in the morning for 30 consecutive days. Victoria found herself smiling, something warm unfurling in her chest as she watched them banter. This was their morning routine, she realized. This easy back and forth, this comfortable rhythm they'd built together, and they were letting her see it, welcoming her into it without hesitation. I should probably work, Victoria said, even as part of her wanted nothing more than to spend the day on this couch, watching animated movies with an 8-year-old who thought she was a superhero. The doctor said rest, Daniel reminded her, and your CFO already called me. I told him you're taking the weekend off and will reconvene Monday morning. Victoria stared at him. You told Richard I was taking the weekend off? I did. And before you get that look on your face, he agreed it was the right call. The board's been informed. Everything that can't wait until Monday has been delegated. You're allowed to recover from a car accident, Victoria. I don't take weekends off. I know. I've managed your calendar for 5 years, remember? He pushed off from the doorframe. Which is exactly why you're taking this one. Doctor's orders. Emma nodded sagely. You have to listen to doctors and to Daddy. He's very smart about taking care of people. Is that so? Victoria looked at Daniel, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to manage my schedule, not to commandeer my entire weekend. Actually, my job is to make sure you can do your job effectively, Daniel countered, which includes making sure you don't work yourself into an early grave. So yes, I'm commandeering your weekend. Fire me if you don't like it. The challenge in his voice made Victoria's pulse quicken. This was new. In 5 years, Daniel had never openly defied her like this. He'd been respectful, deferential, infinitely accommodating. This Daniel, standing in his own apartment, setting boundaries, taking charge of her care, was someone different, someone she found she liked quite a bit. Fine, she conceded, but I'm checking my email. 30-minute limit, then you put the phone away. An hour. 45 minutes. Final offer. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with me now? Someone has to. Daniel's expression softened. You're brilliant running a company, Victoria. Let me be brilliant at taking care of you, just for today. Emma looked between them with bright, curious eyes. Are you guys having a moment? Mrs. Morrison watches shows where people have moments and they get all weird and stare at each other. We're not having a moment, Daniel said quickly. We're discussing my recovery plan, Victoria added. While staring at each other, Emma pointed out. That's a moment. Daniel cleared his throat. Emma, why don't you set up the living room for movie watching? I need to talk to Victoria about boring adult stuff. Like your moment? Like her medication schedule. Go. Emma huffed but obeyed, sliding off the bed and padding out of the room. The moment the door closed behind her, the energy in the room shifted. Daniel moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How are you really feeling?" he asked quietly. "Like I got hit by a car." "Victoria," she sighed, sore, tired. "My ribs hurt when I breathe too deeply. My head feels like it's stuffed with cotton, and I'm completely out of my depth with all of this." She gestured vaguely between them. "The accident or us?" "Both, either. I don't know." Victoria set the breakfast tray aside carefully. "Last night I was running on adrenaline and hospital-grade painkillers. Now it's morning and I'm in your bedroom eating pancakes your daughter made, and I have no idea what I'm doing." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? What you said last night?" "Did she?" Victoria examined the question honestly. She'd built her entire career on making calculated decisions, weighing risks against potential rewards. This thing with Daniel was the opposite of calculated. It was messy and complicated and fraught with professional landmines. But when she looked at him sitting there, morning light catching the worry in his eyes, all she felt was certainty. "No," she said. "I don't regret it. I'm terrified by it, but I don't regret it." The tension in Daniel's shoulders eased. "Okay, good. Because Emma's already planning our wedding and I'd hate to disappoint her." "She's what?" "I'm kidding, mostly." Daniel's mouth quirked. "She did ask this morning if you were my girlfriend now. I told her it was complicated." "What did she say?" "She said grown-ups make everything complicated and that she likes you, and I should just kiss you already because that's what people do in movies when they have moments." Victoria felt her cheeks heat. She's very direct. She's 8. Subtlety isn't her strong suit. Daniel reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind Victoria's ear. The gesture was casual, intimate, and it made her breath catch. For what it's worth, I think she might be onto something. "About the complications or the kissing?" "Both." His hand lingered near her face. "But we don't have to figure it all out right now. We can just be. See what happens. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who apparently have feelings for each other trying to navigate uncharted territory." "I don't do uncharted territory well. I like plans, strategies, clear objectives." "I know. But sometimes the best things are the ones we don't plan for." Daniel stood, putting careful distance between them. "Now finish your breakfast. Emma's going to come back in approximately 3 minutes to drag you to the couch, and you'll need your strength to withstand her extremely detailed explanations of every single character's backstory." He was right. 2.5 minutes later, Emma reappeared. "The living room is ready. I made a nest with all the pillows and blankets. You have to sit in the middle because you're the hurt one and hurt people get the best spot. Daddy, you're in charge of snacks. I want popcorn, but not the kind that gets stuck in your teeth. Victoria, do you have allergies? Mrs. Morrison is allergic to shellfish, and one time she ate shrimp by accident and her face got all puffy." Victoria let herself be herded to the living room, where Emma had indeed created an elaborate nest of cushions and blankets on the couch. The 8-year-old had arranged everything with meticulous care, including a small table within reach holding the remote control, a box of tissues, and a glass of water. "In case you cry," Emma explained, pointing to the tissues. "The Lion King is very sad in the middle part. Even Daddy cries, and he pretends he doesn't." "I have allergies," Daniel called from the kitchen. "During that exact scene every single time. Sure, Daddy." Victoria settled into the nest, and Emma immediately curled up beside her like a small, warm cat. The casual physical affection should have felt strange. Victoria couldn't remember the last time someone had casually touched her outside of professional handshakes, but instead it felt natural. Right. Daniel appeared with popcorn and drinks, settling on Victoria's other side. For a moment, they sat there in a row on the worn couch, and Victoria had the sudden surreal realization that this was the kind of scene she'd seen in other people's lives, but never imagined for herself. Lazy Saturday mornings, family movie time, the simple domesticity of it. "Ready?" Emma asked, remote poised. "Ready," Victoria confirmed. The movie started, and Emma kept up a running commentary on every scene, explaining plot points Victoria could clearly see unfolding, sharing trivia she'd learned from the internet, and occasionally breaking into song. Daniel caught Victoria's eye over Emma's head and smiled, a soft expression that said, "This is my life, and I'm sharing it with you." Halfway through the movie, Victoria's phone buzzed. She reached for it automatically before remembering Daniel's 45-minute rule. "That's 37 minutes, Daniel said without looking away from the screen. "You've got 8 minutes left." "How did you—" "I've been your assistant for 5 years. I know exactly how long you've been checking your phone." Victoria scrolled through the emails. Most were routine. A few required responses she typed out quickly. One from her lawyer made her pause. "There's going to be an investigation into the accident," she said. "Standard procedure, but the insurance companies want statements." "We'll handle it Monday," Daniel said. "And the board wants a meeting about succession planning. Apparently a near-death experience makes them nervous about continuity. Also Monday. Richard wants to know if we're proceeding with the Henderson acquisition." "Victoria." Daniel gently took the phone from her hands. "Monday. All of it. Right now, you're watching The Lion King with Emma and recovering from broken ribs. The company will survive 48 hours without you." "I'm not sure the board would agree." "The board can call me if they have concerns. I'll tell them exactly what I told Richard. You nearly died yesterday. You're taking the weekend to recover, and everything else can wait." His voice was firm. "I know it's hard for you to let go, but you hired me to handle things. Let me handle them." Emma twisted around to look at Victoria seriously. "Daddy's right. You have to rest. When I had the flu, Daddy made me stay in bed for 3 whole days, even though I wanted to go to school because we were learning about volcanoes, and I love volcanoes." "You love volcanoes?" Victoria asked, letting herself be distracted. "They're mountains that explode. What's not to love?" Emma's eyes lit up. "Did you know that the biggest volcano in the solar system is on Mars? It's called Olympus Mons, and it's almost 3 times taller than Mount Everest." "I didn't know that." "Emma's going through a space phase," Daniel explained. "Last month was dinosaurs. Before that, deep-sea creatures." "I contain multitudes," Emma said solemnly, clearly repeating a phrase she'd heard elsewhere. Victoria laughed, then immediately regretted it as her ribs protested. Daniel's hand moved to her back, gentle and steadying. "Easy," he murmured. "No laughing at Emma's wisdom until your ribs heal." "But I'm hilarious," Emma protested. "How can she not laugh?" "Be less hilarious temporarily," Daniel suggested. "Impossible. It's who I am." They settled back into the movie, but Victoria found herself watching them more than the screen. The way Emma unconsciously leaned into her father, the way Daniel's hand absently smoothed his daughter's wild hair, the easy affection between them born of years of being a team of 2 against the world. This was what Daniel had built after losing his wife. Not a fortune or an empire, but something infinitely more valuable. A home, a family, a life full of small, perfect moments that didn't look impressive from the outside but felt like everything from within. When had Victoria stopped believing she could have this? Somewhere in the climb to the top, she'd convinced herself that success meant sacrifice, that you couldn't build an empire and have a life, that love and family were luxuries for people who weren't trying to change the world. But watching Daniel and Emma, seeing the quiet joy in their ordinary Saturday morning, she realized she'd been wrong. She hadn't sacrificed a personal life for success. She'd been too afraid to reach for both, so she'd chosen the safer option, the one where her worth was measured in profit margins instead of in moments like this. The movie reached its emotional climax. Emma was right. Even knowing it was coming, the scene hit hard. Victoria felt her throat tighten. "See?" Emma whispered, pointing at her father. "Told you," he cries. Daniel wiped at his eyes unselfconsciously. It's a beautiful moment about family and legacy and accepting who you are. I'm allowed to have feelings. "You're allowed," Emma agreed. "Victoria, are you crying too?" Victoria realized her own eyes were damp. "Maybe a little." "Good. It means you have a heart." Some of the kids at school say CEOs don't have hearts because they care more about money than people, but I told them that's dumb, because you're a CEO and you're really nice. "Thank you, Emma." Victoria's voice came out rougher than intended. "You're welcome. Also, can we have ice cream for lunch? Daddy says ice cream isn't a meal, but I think hurt people should get ice cream whenever they want." "Emma," Daniel started. "She makes a compelling argument," Victoria said. "The hurt people clause seems legally sound." Daniel looked between them, outnumbered and clearly knowing it. "Fine. But you're also eating actual food. Sandwiches first, then ice cream. Deal! Emma bounced up. I'll help make them. Victoria, do you like peanut butter and jelly or ham and cheese? We also have tuna, but nobody likes tuna except Daddy, and he has questionable taste. Tuna is a perfectly reasonable sandwich filling, Daniel protested. It smells like cat food. You've never eaten cat food. You don't know what it smells like. Mrs. Morrison's cat eats tuna-flavored cat food, and it smells the same. Therefore, proof. Victoria listened to them debate sandwich fillings as they headed to the kitchen, their voices fading into comfortable bickering. She stayed on the couch, surrounded by Emma's carefully arranged pillows, and let herself simply exist in this moment. No emails to answer, no strategies to plan, no walls to maintain. Just her, sitting in a modest apartment, about to eat sandwiches and ice cream for lunch, with a man she was falling for, and his daughter who'd already decided Victoria was part of their family. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. But the rest of Saturday unfolded in a series of small moments that Victoria knew she'd remember long after the bruises faded. Emma insisted on teaching her to play a complicated card game with rules that seemed to change based on Emma's whims. Daniel made dinner, actual dinner, not takeout, and let Emma help despite the 8-year-old's questionable knife skills. They watched another movie, then Emma performed an impromptu living room concert featuring selections from every musical she'd ever seen. Through it all, Victoria felt herself relaxing in a way she couldn't remember experiencing before. Daniel didn't try to kiss her or push for definitions of what they were doing. He just existed beside her, comfortable and solid, occasionally catching her eye with a small smile that said, "I'm glad you're here." When Emma's bedtime arrived, the little girl staged a theatrical protest. "But Victoria's here. It's a special occasion. Special occasions mean late bedtime. Special occasions mean normal bedtime that you're trying to negotiate out of," Daniel countered, unmoved by the performance. "Brush your teeth, put on pajamas, bed." "Can Victoria read me a story?" Daniel looked at Victoria questioningly. "You don't have to." "I'd like to," Victoria said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Emma's face lit up. She grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her down the hallway to a small bedroom that looked like a craft store had exploded inside it. Every surface held evidence of Emma's varied interests. A half-finished volcano model, star charts on the walls, a collection of rocks labeled with careful printing, books spilling from shelves. "This is my room," Emma announced proudly. "Daddy says it's a disaster, but I say it's organized chaos. That's a real thing. I read it on the internet." "It's very you," Victoria said, which made Emma grin. The little girl changed into pajamas covered in planets and moons, brushed her teeth with an enthusiasm that suggested she was actually just getting toothpaste everywhere, and climbed into bed surrounded by approximately 15 stuffed animals. "Pick a book," she instructed, pointing at the overflowing shelf. Victoria scanned the titles. "What's your favorite?" "The one about the girl who builds a rocket ship and goes to Mars. But I've read it a million times and I kind of know it by heart, so maybe pick something else." Victoria selected a book about a young girl who wanted to be an astronaut. Emma snuggled into her pillows, looking up at Victoria with Daniel's warm brown eyes. "You're really pretty," Emma said as Victoria opened the book. "Daddy thinks so too. I heard him tell Mrs. Morrison once that you were the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, but then he got all embarrassed and said he didn't mean it like that. But Mrs. Morrison said he definitely meant it like that." Victoria's pulse quickened. "Did she?" "Uh-huh. Mrs. Morrison says Daddy needs to find someone nice because Emma, that's me, needs a mom and Daddy needs someone to make him smile more. She says he's been sad for a long time, even though he pretends he's not." "Emma, I don't think... Are you going to be my new mom?" The question, asked with such casual directness, made Victoria's breath catch. "Sweetie, that's not... Your dad and I are just... It's complicated." "Grown-ups always say that." Emma considered this. "But I don't think it's actually complicated. I like you. Daddy likes you. You like Daddy. I can tell because you look at him the way Princess Jasmine looks at Aladdin. So why can't you just be together and then eventually you could be my mom?" "Because adult relationships involve a lot of factors beyond just liking each other." "Like what?" Victoria struggled for an 8-year-old appropriate explanation. "Like making sure we work well together outside of work? and figuring out how to balance different parts of our lives, and making sure everyone's happy and safe. Emma thought about this seriously. Okay, but you're trying, right? You're not going to just leave? The vulnerability in the question broke something open in Victoria's chest. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. I promise. Good. Emma settled deeper into her pillows. Now read. This is my favorite part where she has to convince the astronaut training people that she's smart enough even though she's young. Victoria read, and Emma provided running commentary on every page, explaining orbital mechanics and Mars rover technology with the confidence of someone who'd watched every space documentary ever made. When the story ended, Emma was fighting to keep her eyes open. One more? She asked hopefully. Nice try. Your dad said one story. Can I tell you a secret? Of course. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. I really miss having a mom. I don't remember mine much, just little bits. But I see other kids with their moms, and I get sad sometimes. Daddy tries really hard to be both, and he's really good at it, but it's not the same. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. I bet your mom would be so proud of you, Emma. You're smart and funny and kind. Do you think she'd like that Daddy maybe found someone new? I think she'd want your dad to be happy, and you too. Are you happy when you're with us? The question was so earnest, so genuinely curious that Victoria answered with complete honesty. Yes, I am. Emma smiled sleepily. Good. Then you should stay. We're really fun once you get to know us. I'm starting to figure that out. Victoria? Yes? I'm glad you didn't die in the car crash. I would have been really sad if you died before I got to know you. Victoria's throat closed up entirely. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Emma's forehead, surprising herself with the gesture. I'm glad too, sweetheart. Sleep well. Love you, Emma mumbled, already halfway to sleep. Victoria froze, but Emma's eyes were closed, her breathing evening out, and the words had been said with the casual ease of a child who gave love freely and expected nothing in return. She found Daniel in the kitchen, washing dishes with methodical focus. He looked up when she entered, reading something in her expression. Everything okay? She asked if I was going to be her new mom. Daniel's hand stilled in the soapy water. Oh, I'm sorry, she shouldn't have. She told me she misses having a mother, that she's glad I didn't die because now she gets to know me. She said she loves me. Victoria leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. Daniel, I don't know how to be what she needs. He dried his hands and moved closer. Victoria, Emma doesn't need you to be anything other than who you are. She just needs you to care. And you do. I can see it. The way you listen to her volcano facts, the way you let her curl up next to you during the movie, the way you just spent 45 minutes reading to her when you should be resting your concussed brain. But what if I mess this up? What if I let her get attached and then I can't do this? I don't know how to be part of a family, Daniel. I've spent 10 years alone. You chose to be alone, Daniel said gently. There's a difference, and now you're choosing something else. That's allowed. Is it? Victoria's voice broke. What if I choose wrong? What if I hurt her, hurt you? Daniel cupped her face in his hands, the gesture becoming familiar already. Then we'll deal with it, together. But Victoria, you're already part of this whether you realize it or not. Emma claimed you the first time she met you. And me? His thumb brushed her cheek. I've been yours for 3 years. We're not going anywhere. You can't promise that. Watch me. He leaned his forehead against hers. I know you're scared. I know this is new territory. But I also know you don't back down from challenges. You built a company from nothing. You've faced down hostile boards and aggressive competitors and your own self-doubt. This is just another challenge. One we face together. Victoria closed her eyes. I fired someone once for suggesting I was too emotionally invested in a project. I gave an interview where I said personal relationships were distractions from building something meaningful. I've spent years being exactly the kind of person who shouldn't be trusted with a child's heart. And yet here you are, worried sick about breaking it, which tells me everything I need to know about who you actually are under all that armor. Daniel pulled back slightly. You're not going to be perfect at this. Neither am I. We're going to make mistakes, but we're going to make them together, and we're going to figure it out as we go. That's what families do. I don't know how to be family. Then let us teach you. He smiled. Emma's an excellent instructor. Fair warning, though, her curriculum involves a lot of impromptu dance parties and very strong opinions about which dinosaurs would win in theoretical fights. Despite everything, Victoria laughed. I think I can handle that. Yeah? Daniel's expression turned hopeful. Yeah. Victoria took a shaky breath. I'm terrified and completely out of my depth and probably going to need you to be patient while I figure out how to do this. But yes, I want to try. Daniel kissed her then. It was soft and careful, mindful of her injuries, and it tasted like hope and new beginnings, and the promise of something neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted. When they broke apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers again. So what happens Monday? Monday I go back to work. We tell HR about us. We figure out the logistics of you transferring to a different department so there's no conflict of interest. We deal with the board and the press and everyone's opinions. And us? Victoria met his eyes. Monday we keep being us. We figure it out one day at a time, together. I can work with that. Daniel's smile was soft and real. For tonight, though, you need sleep. Doctor's orders. Your bedroom or the couch? My bedroom. I'll take the couch. Daniel, non-negotiable. Your ribs need proper support. He kissed her forehead. Besides, Emma will wake me up at 6 demanding pancakes, and you need to sleep in. They stood there in the small kitchen, holding each other carefully. Two people who'd spent years circling each other finally allowing themselves to land. Outside, the city continued its endless pulse. Inside, something new was beginning, fragile and uncertain and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Victoria let Daniel lead her back to the bedroom. She took the prescribed pain medication and settled into sheets that smelled like him. When he turned to leave, she caught his hand. Daniel? Yeah? Thank you. For today. For Emma. For being patient with me. Always, he said simply. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Victoria lay in the darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of Daniel settling on the couch, the building creaking around them, the distant sound of traffic. Her body ached, her mind raced with everything that waited on Monday, and her heart felt like it might crack open from the weight of everything she was allowing herself to want. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Hale wasn't alone. And as she drifted towards sleep, she realized that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Sunday morning arrived with Emma jumping on the couch where Daniel had fallen asleep, announcing that they were making a special goodbye breakfast for Victoria because she'd be going home later and they needed to send her off properly. Daniel groaned something about it being barely 6 o'clock, but Emma was undeterred, dragging him toward the kitchen with the determination of a general mobilizing troops. Victoria woke to their voices drifting through the apartment. Emma's excited chatter punctuated by Daniel's patient responses and the clatter of cooking implements. She lay there for a moment, letting the sounds wash over her, memorizing the feeling of waking up to something other than silence. Her phone showed 23 new emails, but for once she didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she eased herself out of bed, her ribs protesting but manageable, and made her way to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked different than she had Friday morning. Same sharp features, same careful composure, but something in her eyes had shifted. Something had softened. When she emerged, Emma was at the bedroom door holding a cup of coffee. Daddy said you like it black with no sugar because you're hardcore, Emma announced, carefully handing over the mug. I think that's weird. Coffee should be more like hot chocolate, but Daddy says that defeats the purpose. Your dad's right on this one, Victoria said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Thank you, Emma. You're welcome. Also, we're making French toast because Daddy said pancakes 2 days in a row would be overkill, even though I disagree. Can you come help? You can sit at the table and supervise while Daddy and I do the actual cooking since you're still hurt. Victoria followed Emma to the kitchen, where Daniel stood at the stove in pajama pants and a faded college t-shirt, his hair still rumpled from sleep. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was so open and genuine that Victoria felt her breath catch. Morning, he said. Emma declared herself head chef today, so I've been demoted to sous chef. You're apparently quality control. It's a very important job, Emma said seriously, cracking an egg with more enthusiasm than accuracy. You have to taste everything and tell us if it's good enough. That's a lot of pressure, Victoria said, settling into one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. You can handle it. You're a CEO. Emma whisked the eggs with violent vigor, sending droplets flying. Daddy, am I doing it right? You're doing great, Em. Maybe a little less splashing. They worked together with the easy coordination of years of practice, Daniel gently correcting Emma's technique while letting her maintain the illusion of being in charge. Victoria watched them, coffee warming her hands, and felt something shift further in her chest. This was what she'd be stepping into if she really committed to this. Not just Daniel, but this whole life. Early mornings and cooking chaos, and an 8-year-old with strong opinions about everything. The thought should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself wanting to pull out her phone and take a picture, to capture this moment before it slipped away. Victoria, what kind of toppings do you like? Emma asked, expertly flipping a piece of French toast with Daniel's steadying hand on her wrist. We have syrup, obviously, and powdered sugar, and Daddy bought strawberries yesterday, and we have whipped cream, but he says that's only for special occasions. Well, this is a special occasion, Victoria said. It's your goodbye breakfast for me. Emma beamed. See, Daddy? Special occasion. Whipped cream is mandatory. Daniel shook his head but pulled the can from the refrigerator. You two are going to be dangerous together. We're going to be the best, Emma corrected. Victoria's smart and I'm creative. That's an unstoppable combination. They ate breakfast at the small kitchen table, Emma narrating every bite and explaining her complex ranking system for French toast quality. Daniel caught Victoria's eyes several times, small smiles passing between them that felt like shared secrets. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. After breakfast, Emma insisted on showing Victoria her rock collection in minute detail, explaining the geological properties of each specimen with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many YouTube videos. Daniel cleaned the kitchen, and the apartment settled into a comfortable rhythm that Victoria had never experienced before, but found herself already addicted to. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted slightly. It's Mrs. Morrison, he said to Emma, probably confirming plans for next week. I'll be right back. He stepped into his bedroom, and Victoria heard his voice through the door, friendly and warm. Emma, meanwhile, had moved on to showing Victoria her elaborate drawing of the solar system, complete with a rocket ship that Emma proudly announced was going to Mars. When I'm an astronaut, I'm going to name a crater after you, Emma said, matter-of-factly. That's what astronauts do. They name things after important people. I'm honored, Victoria said, genuinely touched. You should be. I'm going to be a very famous astronaut. Emma studied her drawing critically. Do you think Daddy will be lonely when I go to space? It's really far away and I'll be gone for a long time. I think your dad will be incredibly proud of you, and you can send him messages from Mars. That takes 20 minutes one way because of the distance, Emma said. I researched it, so conversations would be really slow, but I guess that's okay because Daddy's patient. She looked up at Victoria with those serious brown eyes. Will you take care of him when I'm gone? He acts tough, but he gets sad sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking. The question, delivered with such casual trust, made Victoria's throat tight. Emma, you're 8. You have a lot of time before Mars. I know, but I like to plan ahead. Daddy says planning is important. She added another star to her drawing. Plus, I think you and Daddy should be together anyway, even if I wasn't going to Mars. You make him smile different. Different how? Like he means it all the way to his eyes. Emma tilted her head. He smiles at me like that, and he smiled at Mama like that in pictures, but he doesn't smile at other people like that, except you. So I think that means something. Before Victoria could respond, Daniel emerged from the bedroom looking troubled. Everything okay? Victoria asked. Yeah, just Mrs. Morrison can't watch Emma tomorrow. Her daughter went into early labor and she's flying to Boston tonight. He ran a hand through his hair. I'll figure something out. Maybe I can work from home. You have the Henderson meeting, Victoria said. You've been preparing for weeks. I know, but Emma can't stay home alone, and her usual after-school program doesn't have space on Mondays. Daniel's jaw tightened with frustration. I'll call Richard, explain the situation. Someone else can take the meeting. Or Emma could come to the office with me, Victoria heard herself say. Both Daniel and Emma stared at her. What? Daniel said. I have a full day of meetings, but most of them are in my office. Emma could do homework in the conference room, or we could set her up with a tablet in the break room. It's not ideal, but it's better than you missing the Henderson meeting. Victoria, I can't ask you to babysit my daughter. You're not asking. I'm offering. Victoria looked at Emma. What do you think? Want to see where your dad and I work? Emma's face lit up like someone had turned on stadium lights. Really? I can come to your office? With the big building and the fancy elevator and everything? Everything, Victoria confirmed, wondering what she was getting herself into. Yes, 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 yes. Emma bounced on her toes. I'll be so good, I promise. I'll do all my homework and I won't touch anything important, and I'll use my inside voice, even though your building is probably really cool, and I'll want to explore everything. Daniel looked between them, clearly torn. Victoria, are you sure? Emma's great, but she's also 8 and energetic and prone to asking approximately 8,000 questions per hour. 8,500, Emma corrected proudly. I can handle it, Victoria said, more confident than she felt. Besides, it'll be good practice. The words hung in the air, weighted with implication. Practice for what? For being part of their lives? For being someone Emma could depend on? For building something that looked like family? Daniel's expression softened. Okay, if you're really sure. I'm sure. Emma threw her arms around Victoria's waist, careful of her ribs. This is the best day ever. Wait until I tell my friends I got to go to a real CEO's office. Madison is going to be so jealous. Her mom works in accounting, and she says it's boring. I can't promise it won't be boring, Victoria warned. Lots of meetings and paperwork. But you're there, so it'll be interesting. Emma pulled back, already planning. I need to pack my backpack. I need homework and books and colored pencils in case I need to draw, and my good notebook, and, Daddy, help me pick an outfit. I need to look professional. She raced off to her room, leaving Victoria and Daniel alone in the kitchen. You don't have to do this, Daniel said quietly. I know, but I want to. Victoria met his eyes. Is that okay? I'm not overstepping? You're not overstepping. I'm just... He moved closer, reaching for her hand. You keep surprising me. Friday you were my boss who barely acknowledged Emma's existence. Now you're offering to bring her to work so I don't miss a meeting. People can change. In 3 days? When they're properly motivated. Victoria squeezed his hand. Emma asked me this morning if I'd take care of you when she goes to Mars. Apparently she's already planning her astronaut career. Daniel laughed. She's been planning that since she was 5. I've tried to gently suggest maybe having a backup career, but she's committed. She's smart, determined, confident. I wonder where she gets that from. Her mother was like that too. Daniel's voice went soft. Sarah was fearless. She would have loved seeing Emma now. Would have loved... He trailed off. Would have loved what? You. She would have loved you. She always said I needed someone who could match my stubbornness with their own. His thumb traced circles on the back of Victoria's hand. I think you would have liked her too. You're different people, but both so strong in your own ways. Victoria felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Not jealousy. How could she be jealous of a woman who'd died? But a kind of wistful sadness for the life Daniel had lost, the family that had been broken before its time. I wish I could have met her, Victoria said honestly. Me too. Daniel pulled her closer, mindful of her injuries. But I think she'd be happy I found you. Found this. She never wanted me to be alone. They stood there in the small kitchen, holding each other carefully, the morning light streaming through the window. From Emma's room came the sounds of furious packing and the 8-year-old's off-key humming. I should probably go home today, Victoria said reluctantly. Get my own clothes, check on the apartment, figure out what I'm walking into tomorrow. I know. Daniel didn't let go. But I'm glad you stayed, both days. Me too. Emma reappeared dragging a backpack that looked like it weighed more than she did. I'm ready! Oh wait, are you leaving now? Because if you are, I need to give you a proper goodbye. Mrs. Morrison says proper goodbyes are important. I'll leave this afternoon, Victoria said. We still have time. Good. Because I planned activities. Emma produced a list written in crayon. We're going to play board games, and then I'm going to teach you my handshake that I do with my best friend Maya, and then we have to take a picture together so I can show my class, and then... Emma, breathe, Daniel said with amusement. I'm breathing. I'm just also planning. Emma looked at Victoria seriously. Is it okay if we take a picture? I want to remember today. Of course, Victoria said, her chest tight. They spent the rest of the morning following Emma's carefully planned itinerary. The board game was so complicated that Victoria suspected Emma was making up rules as they went. The handshake involved approximately 17 steps and 2 spins that Victoria executed with questionable grace. The picture was taken on Emma's insistence by Daniel, all 3 of them crowded together on the couch, Emma in the middle, beaming like the sun. When Daniel showed Victoria the photo, she barely recognized herself. The woman in the picture was smiling, really smiling, not the professional expression she used for press photos. Her eyes were soft. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged. Can you send that to me? Victoria asked. Already done. Daniel's phone buzzed. Along with about 40 other photos Emma insisted I take this weekend for documentation purposes. By early afternoon, Victoria couldn't put off leaving any longer. She had to face her own apartment, her own life. The reality of Monday morning approaching with all its complications. Daniel called a car service. Emma packed Victoria a container of leftover French toast with such solemnity you'd think she was sending someone off to war. And then they were all standing in the building's small lobby, the moment of goodbye arriving too fast. Thank you, Victoria said to Daniel, for everything. This weekend, I know. He kissed her forehead gently. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll figure out the logistics. Emma hugged Victoria fiercely. Don't forget, Monday we're going to your office and it's going to be amazing. Wear your most CEO-like outfit so everyone knows you're the boss. I will, Victoria promised. And don't work too hard tonight. You're still recovering. Yes, ma'am. And tell your apartment you missed it even though you were having a good time here because apartments have feelings too. Emma, Daniel started. What? They do. Everything has feelings if you pay attention. Emma looked up at Victoria. I'm really glad you're okay, and I'm really glad you like us. I'm glad I like you too, Victoria said, her voice rough. The car arrived. Victoria got in, and through the window she watched Daniel and Emma on the sidewalk, his hand on his daughter's shoulder, both of them waving. Emma jumped up and down, her enthusiasm undimmed. Daniel smiled that soft smile that reached his eyes. As the car pulled away, Victoria felt the weekend receding like a dream she'd had, perfect and impossible, and already fading. Her penthouse apartment was across town, in a different world entirely. A world of marble counters and floor-to-ceiling windows and silence so complete it felt like a presence. When she walked through her door 20 minutes later, the contrast was jarring. Everything was exactly as she'd left it Friday morning, spotless, organized, empty. Victoria set down her bag and stood in the expansive living room, looking at furniture she'd selected from a catalog, art she'd purchased because a designer said it was sophisticated, a home that looked like it belonged in a magazine and felt like it belonged to no one. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel with 3 photos attached, Emma making French toast, Victoria laughing at something Emma had said, the 3 of them on the couch. Below the photos, a message. Emma's already asking when you're coming back. She's decided Sunday dinners should be a tradition. Victoria sat on her pristine white couch and looked at the photos, at the life she'd glimpsed this weekend, at the possibility of something she'd never let herself want. Her email dinged. The board wanted a conference call in an hour. Her lawyer needed signatures. Richard had sent a detailed brief on the Henderson meeting. The world she'd built was reasserting itself, demanding her attention, pulling her back into the familiar patterns. Victoria looked around her empty apartment, then back at the photos on her phone. For 10 years, this had been enough. Success, achievement, the satisfaction of building something from nothing. She told herself that personal connections were distractions, that she didn't need anyone, that being alone was the same as being strong. But sitting here now, the silence pressing in from all sides, she realized the truth she'd been avoiding. She'd been lonely. For years, she'd been achingly, devastatingly lonely. and she'd convinced herself it was a choice rather than a sacrifice. Victoria pulled out her laptop and joined the board's video call. For the next hour, she fielded questions about the accident, reassured nervous investors, and outlined the transition plan for the Henderson acquisition. She was sharp, focused, every inch the CEO they expected her to be. When the call ended, she drafted emails, reviewed contracts, and prepared briefings for Monday's meetings. This was familiar. This she knew how to do. But between tasks, she kept glancing at her phone, at the photos, at the text messages that arrived periodically throughout the evening, Emma sending a picture of her outfit for tomorrow, Daniel checking that Victoria was resting, Emma again with a carefully drawn picture of the three of them labeled "My New Family." The misspelling made Victoria smile despite herself. Around 8 o'clock, her phone rang. "Daniel, sorry to bother you," he said when she answered. "Emma insisted I call. She's worried you're working too hard." Victoria could hear Emma in the background. "Tell her she needs to sleep. Recovery is important." "Did you hear that?" Daniel asked, amused. "I heard. Tell Emma I'm just finishing up and then I'm going to bed." "She says you're lying because CEOs always say they're finishing up and then they work for 3 more hours." Victoria laughed. "She's not wrong, but I promise, I'm actually done for the night." There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice came back quieter, like he'd moved away from Emma. "How are you really? Being back in your apartment?" Victoria looked around the pristine space. "It's different. Quieter." "Yeah." She heard the understanding in his voice. "Call me if you need anything, okay? Even if it's just to talk." "I will." "Victoria?" "Yeah?" "This weekend. I know tomorrow everything gets complicated, but I need you to know that what happened here was real. All of it." "I know," Victoria said softly. "Okay. Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense." After they hung up, Victoria sat with the phone in her hand, staring at the city lights through her enormous windows. 24 floors below, life continued. People went home to families. Couples shared dinners. Children got tucked into bed by parents who loved them. She'd watched it all for years from this height, separate and apart, and told herself she preferred it this way. But now she knew what it felt like to be down there, part of it all. And she couldn't unknow it. Couldn't unfeel the warmth of Emma's hug or the safety of Daniel's arms or the simple joy of making French toast on a Sunday morning. Victoria got ready for bed in her luxurious master bathroom, took her medication in her designer kitchen, and climbed into her king-size bed with its expensive sheets. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as she'd planned, and she'd never felt more alone in her life. She picked up her phone one more time, pulling up the photos from the weekend. Emma's gap-toothed grin, Daniel's soft smile. The three of them together on that worn couch in that small apartment that somehow felt more like home than this place ever had. Victoria made a decision. She opened her email and composed a message to her assistant, her new assistant, now that Daniel would be transferring departments. She outlined her schedule for the next month, blocking out time in ways she'd never done before. 2 hours every weekday evening marked unavailable. Every other Saturday marked personal. Sunday dinners marked recurring, non-negotiable. Then she sent another email to HR, requesting a meeting first thing Monday morning to discuss relationship disclosure policies and department transfer procedures. And finally, she sent a text to Daniel. "I'm in, all in. Whatever it takes to make this work. We'll figure out the complications together." His response came within seconds. "Together. I like the sound of that." Followed immediately by a photo from Emma, a drawing of a rocket ship with 3 stick figures inside, heading toward a badly drawn Mars. "We're all going to space," Emma had written, "as a family." Victoria set the phone on her nightstand and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring 1,000 complications. The board's questions, the whispers in the office, the careful navigation of company policies and professional boundaries. The challenge of integrating her ordered life with the beautiful chaos of Daniel and Emma. But tonight, lying in the darkness of her empty apartment, Victoria Hale allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she'd planned. One that included Sunday morning French toast and Emma's 8,500 questions and Daniel's quiet strength. One that looked messy and complicated and absolutely nothing like success was supposed to look. One that looked, she realized with a clarity that made her breath catch, exactly like happiness. Sleep came slowly, but when it finally arrived, Victoria dreamed not of boardrooms and acquisitions, but of a small apartment filled with laughter and a little girl who believed in Mars, and a man who'd loved her long before she knew how to love herself. And for the first time in 10 years, her dreams didn't feel empty. They felt like coming home. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Victoria stood in front of her closet at 6:30, staring at rows of identical power suits, and realized she was nervous. Not about the Henderson meeting or the board's questions or even the professional complications of what she was about to do. She was nervous about seeing Daniel at work, about navigating the shift from what they'd been to what they were becoming, about whether the intimacy of the weekend could survive the fluorescent lights and corporate hierarchy of Hale Dynamics. She selected a charcoal suit, her armor, the outfit that made her feel untouchable, and paired it with the emerald blouse Daniel had once mentioned brought out her eyes. Not that he'd said it to her directly. She'd overheard him telling her previous assistant that Ms. Hale looked particularly sharp that day. The memory made her smile now, understanding it for what it had been. A man trying to compliment the woman he loved without crossing professional lines. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Emma's been awake since 5:30. She's wearing her business casual outfit, which is apparently a tutu under a blazer. I've given up fighting it. Victoria found herself laughing out loud in her empty apartment, the sound echoing off the marble surfaces. She typed back, "Perfect. Tell her CEOs appreciate creative fashion choices." The reply came immediately. She says you're her favorite CEO ever and she hasn't even met any others. Also, she packed 17 colored pencils just in case. Just in case of what? She didn't specify. With Emma, it's better not to ask. Victoria finished getting ready with Daniel's texts, providing a running commentary on Emma's increasing excitement. By the time her car service arrived, she felt some of her nervousness ease. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, improbably, it might actually work. The Hale Dynamics building rose 40 stories above the city, all glass and steel and ambition made manifest. Victoria had designed it herself, insisted on every detail, turned it into a monument to what she'd built. She'd always felt a surge of pride walking through those doors. This morning, she felt something else entirely. She felt like she was about to blow up the careful world she'd constructed, and she had no idea what would be left standing when the smoke cleared. Her new assistant, Jennifer, efficient but not Daniel, nobody would ever be Daniel, met her in the lobby with coffee and a tablet full of updates. "The board wants to see you at 9, Jennifer said, falling into step beside Victoria. "HR called 3 times about the meeting you requested, and there's a situation with the design team that needs your attention." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where they're threatening to quit en masse if we don't reconsider the timeline for the Westbrook project." Victoria sighed. "Schedule them for 10:30 and confirm the HR meeting for 8. "Already done," Jennifer hesitated. "Also, Daniel called. Said to tell you he and his daughter will be here around 8:45 and to text him which floor." Several nearby employees glanced over at that, curiosity sharp in their eyes. News of the accident had spread, of course. The company grapevine was efficient. But Daniel bringing his daughter to the office was unusual enough to generate speculation. 24th floor, Victoria said calmly. "My private conference room. And Jennifer, clear my calendar from 12 to 1. I'm having lunch with them." More glances. More whispers that would follow in her wake. Victoria kept her expression neutral and headed for the elevator, but her heart was racing. The HR meeting happened in Susan Park's pristine office, all neutral tones and carefully worded policies. Susan was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and unflappable, and she'd handled every sensitive personnel issue at Hale Dynamics for the past 8 years. "So," Susan said, settling behind her desk with Victoria's requested file open on her computer, "you want to initiate a relationship disclosure for you and Daniel Carter." "Yes." "Your executive assistant of 5 years." "Former executive assistant. I'm requesting his immediate transfer to a different department with no loss of pay or benefits." Susan studied her for a long moment. "Victoria, I have to ask, are you certain about this? Not about the relationship itself, that's your business, but about the timing. You nearly died Friday. You're probably still processing trauma. This might not be the best moment for major life decisions. I appreciate your concern, but I'm certain." The optics are complicated. You're the CEO. He's an employee you've had direct authority over. Even with the transfer, people will talk. Let them talk. Victoria met Susan's gaze steadily. I'm not breaking any policies. I'm following proper disclosure procedures, and I'm requesting the transfer to eliminate any conflicts of interest. What people choose to gossip about isn't my concern. It is when it affects company morale and your authority. Susan leaned back in her chair. I'm not trying to talk you out of this. I'm making sure you understand the implications. You've built this company through sheer force of will and an absolutely spotless professional reputation. This changes that narrative. Maybe it's time for a new narrative. The words surprised Victoria even as she said them. I've spent 10 years being untouchable. Maybe being human isn't the worst thing I could be. Susan's expression softened slightly. Daniel's a good man. I've never heard a negative word about him. And if you're sure, I'll process the paperwork today. We can move him to business development. Same pay grade, similar responsibilities, different reporting structure. Thank you. One more thing. Susan pulled up something on her screen. He has a daughter, right? 8 years old? Emma. Yes. Our family benefits package includes flexible scheduling for single parents. Make sure Daniel knows he can use it. And if Emma ever needs to be here after school, we have a quiet room on the 15th floor that's technically for nursing mothers, but doubles as a homework space in a pinch. Victoria felt something warm bloom in her chest. I didn't know we had that. You approved the budget for it 3 years ago. You probably don't remember. It was buried in the facilities update. But you funded it. Susan smiled. You take care of your people, Victoria, even when you pretend you're just taking care of the bottom line. The observation sat with Victoria as she took the elevator back to her office. How many things had she approved over the years? Convinced she was just being practical, never acknowledging that maybe she cared more than she wanted to admit? Her office occupied the entire 40th floor, an expansive space of windows and minimalist furniture that had been photographed for business magazines. Victoria had always loved it up here. The city spread below like a conquest, everything small and manageable from this height. This morning, it felt isolating. Jennifer appeared at 8:40. Daniel and his daughter just arrived in the lobby. Security called up. Send them to 24, I'll meet them there. Victoria took the elevator down, her pulse quickening with each floor. The 24th floor housed several small conference rooms used for client meetings and private discussions. She'd reserved the largest one. The space she typically used for negotiations, she wanted to keep away from the main office. Daniel and Emma stepped off the elevator just as Victoria arrived. Emma wore a pink tutu under a navy blazer that was clearly Daniel's, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. Her hair was in pigtails secured with sparkly hair ties, and she carried a backpack covered in space-themed patches. Victoria! Emma rushed forward, then stopped abruptly, looking uncertain. Am I allowed to hug you at work, or is that unprofessional? The question asked with such earnest concern made Victoria's chest tight. She crouched down to Emma's level, ignoring the protest from her ribs. You can always hug me, Emma. Work or not. Emma threw her arms around Victoria's neck. Your building is so tall, and the elevator was so fast, and there's a lady downstairs who gave me a visitor badge, and I feel very important. You're very important, Victoria said, standing carefully. Her eyes met Daniel's over Emma's head, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He was looking at her like she'd hung the moon, like watching her with his daughter was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Hi, he said softly. Hi yourself. They stood there for a moment, Emma between them, the weight of the weekend and everything unspoken hanging in the air. Daniel was back in a suit, professional and composed, but Victoria could see the warmth in his eyes, the knowledge of what they'd shared, the promise of what was beginning. Daddy says I get to do homework in a real conference room, Emma announced, breaking the moment. Is it okay if I use the markers? I promise I'll only use paper, not the table. You can use whatever you need. Victoria led them down the hall to the conference room. I have meetings this morning, but I'll check on you. And at lunch we'll all eat together. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive table that could seat 20, and a whiteboard that took up an entire wall. Emma's eyes went wide. This is the coolest room ever. Can I draw on that board? Emma? Daniel started. It's fine, Victoria said. That's what it's for. Emma immediately began setting up her homework station with the organizational skills of a general planning a campaign. Folders were arranged by subject, pencils lined up in rainbow order, a snack pack of crackers positioned within easy reach. "I'll be in meetings until 11, Victoria told Daniel. "Jennifer will check in on Emma, and there's a quiet room on 15 if she needs a break from being in here." "We'll be fine." Daniel's hand brushed against hers, subtle enough that Emma wouldn't notice, but deliberate enough that Victoria's pulse jumped. "Go be a CEO. We'll be here when you're done." Victoria wanted to kiss him, wanted to pull him close and confirm that this was real, that the weekend hadn't been a dream, that they were really doing this. But Emma was watching with bright, curious eyes, and they were standing in her company, and some boundaries still needed to be navigated carefully. "I'll see you soon," she said instead, and headed for the elevator. The board meeting was exactly as tedious as expected. Concerned questions about her health, pointed questions about the accident investigation, and thinly veiled suggestions that she should consider appointing a second-in-command in case of future emergencies. Victoria handled it with her usual composure, answering each concern with data and logic until they were satisfied. But throughout the meeting, part of her mind was on the 24th floor. Was Emma behaving? Was Daniel comfortable? Were they okay? When she finally escaped at 10:15, she headed straight for the conference room. Through the glass wall, she could see Emma at the whiteboard, drawing what appeared to be an elaborate diagram of the solar system, while Daniel worked on his laptop at the table. Victoria pushed open the door. "How's it going?" "Victoria!" Emma spun around, marker in hand. "Look, I finished my math homework and my reading log, and now I'm teaching Daddy about the Kuiper Belt. Did you know there are dwarf planets out there? Like, a lot of them?" "I did not know that." Victoria looked at Daniel. "Everything okay?" "Perfect, although I've learned more about dwarf planets in the last hour than I ever thought I needed to know." His eyes were warm with amusement. "Your design team stopped by. Apparently they heard you had a special guest and wanted to meet her." They wanted to meet me?" Emma asked, delighted. "You're pretty famous," Daniel said. "Not everyone gets to spend the day at Hale Dynamics." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jennifer appeared, looking slightly frazzled. "Victoria, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the situation with the design team has escalated. They're in the main conference room and refusing to leave until you address their concerns." Victoria sighed. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." After Jennifer left, Victoria turned back to Emma and Daniel. "I'm sorry, this might take a while." "We're fine," Daniel assured her. "Emma has enough homework to last until next year, apparently." "I'm very thorough," Emma said seriously. "Mrs. Henderson says I have excellent time management skills for an 8-year-old. Victoria smiled despite the stress of the impending confrontation. "I'll come back as soon as I can." The design team meeting devolved into exactly the kind of territorial dispute Victoria hated. Competing egos, unrealistic demands, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually possible given their timeline and budget. She spent 90 minutes mediating, negotiating, and ultimately putting her foot down with the kind of authority that reminded everyone exactly who ran this company. By the time she emerged, it was nearly noon and she was exhausted. Her ribs ached, her head throbbed, and all she wanted was to go back to that conference room where Daniel and Emma were waiting. She found them exactly where she'd left them. Emma had moved on to drawing an elaborate picture of the building, complete with tiny windows and what appeared to be a rocket ship landing on the roof. Daniel was on a video call, speaking in the calm, professional tone Victoria had heard 1,000 times. When he saw her, his expression shifted. Not the professional mask dropping, something more subtle, a softening around his eyes, a small smile that was just for her. He wrapped up the call and stood. "How'd it go?" "The design team has been reminded that I'm still capable of firing people even after surviving a car accident." Victoria sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "They're back on schedule." "You look tired." "I am tired. Turns out recovering from broken ribs while managing company crises isn't ideal." She managed a smile. "But I promised Emma lunch. Where does she want to go?" "Actually, we brought lunch." Daniel pulled a container from his bag. Emma insisted on packing enough food for 3. She may have overestimated portions. "I made sandwiches," Emma announced proudly. "Peanut butter and jelly for me, turkey and cheese for Daddy, and I made you both because I wasn't sure which you'd like better." Victoria looked at the carefully wrapped sandwiches Emma had clearly prepared herself, the crusts cut off unevenly, the contents slightly squashed from being in the backpack. Something in her chest cracked open. "These look perfect," she said, her voice rough. They ate lunch in the conference room, Emma narrating every detail of her morning. She'd completed all her homework, drawn 6 pictures, and made friends with Jennifer, who'd apparently taught her how to use the fancy coffee machine to make hot chocolate. "And everyone here is so nice," Emma said through a mouthful of sandwich. "The design people came by and let me see their drawings, and someone named Richard asked if I was Daniel's daughter, and said I had my dad's smile. And there was a lady who said she works in business development and that Daddy's going to be joining her team soon." Victoria and Daniel exchanged glances. "You already processed the transfer?" Daniel asked quietly. "HR moves fast when I request it." Victoria kept her voice neutral, aware of Emma listening. "It's effective immediately. Same pay, same level, different department." "Business development," Daniel tested the words. "What will I be doing?" "Client relations, mostly. Some project management, strategic planning for new initiatives." Victoria met his eyes. "It's a lateral move, no loss of responsibility or authority, just a different focus." "And no direct report to you." "No direct report to me," Victoria confirmed. Emma looked between them, her 8-year-old perception picking up on the undercurrents. "Is Daddy in trouble? Did he do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Daniel said quickly. "Sometimes people change jobs to learn new things. It's a good thing." "Oh, okay." Emma seemed satisfied with that explanation. "Can I go draw more planets on the whiteboard?" "Of course." As Emma returned to her artwork, Daniel moved his chair closer to Victoria's, close enough that their knees touched under the table, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for handling this, for making it easy. It's the right thing to do. We can't—" She glanced at Emma, lowering her voice further. "We can't move forward if there's any question about conflicts of interest." "I know, but it's still a big change. 5 years of working directly with you, and now—" He trailed off. "Now you work in a different department and we figure out how to be colleagues who are also something more." Victoria's hand found his under the table, their fingers intertwining. "We'll make it work." "You sound sure." "I am sure. For the first time in a long time, I'm absolutely sure about something that isn't business." Daniel squeezed her hand. "The office is already talking. Jennifer mentioned it. People are curious about why Emma's here, why I'm transferring. The rumors are starting." "Let them talk." Victoria used her free hand to take a bite of her sandwich. "We're not hiding. We're just being professional while we navigate this." "Victoria, look!" Emma called from the whiteboard. "I drew our rocket ship going to Mars. See? There's you and Daddy and me, and we're all going on an adventure." They both turned to look at the drawing. 3 stick figures with massive smiles, contained in a triangular rocket ship, heading toward a red circle covered in craters. Above the ship, Emma had written in careful letters, "The best family ever." Victoria's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, Emma." "Do you think we'll really go to Mars someday?" Emma asked seriously. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," Victoria said. "Even be a CEO like you." "Especially that." Emma beamed and went back to adding stars to her drawing. Daniel's thumb traced circles on Victoria's palm, the gesture grounding and intimate. "She really loves you," he murmured. "I've never seen her attached to someone this quickly." "The feeling is mutual." Victoria watched Emma work, the little girl's tongue poking out in concentration. "I'm terrified of letting her down." "You won't." "You can't know that." "I can." Daniel's voice was absolutely certain. "Because I've watched you for 5 years, Victoria. I've seen how you handle things, how you care even when you pretend not to, how you show up for people. You're going to show up for Emma, for us. I know it." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Board wants another meeting at 2. About succession planning again. Sorry." She showed Daniel the message. "I'm going to be tied up all afternoon." "We'll be fine." Emma brought approximately 73 hours worth of activities. "It's only 17 hours, Emma corrected without turning around. "And that's if I do each activity at normal speed. If I rush, it's probably more like 12. Victoria laughed despite her exhaustion. "How long can you two stay?" I have to pick Emma up at 3 to get her to her piano lesson, Daniel said. But we're good until then. The afternoon blurred into a series of meetings and phone calls and the endless demands of running a company. But every hour, Victoria found herself making excuses to return to the 24th floor, to check on Emma, to see Daniel, to remind herself that this was real, that they were really here, that she wasn't imagining this fundamental shift in her carefully ordered world. Around 2:30, she found them packing up. Emma had created an elaborate gallery of drawings that covered the whiteboard and half the windows. The solar system, the building, a very optimistic portrait of Victoria labeled "the best boss," and a family portrait that made Victoria's chest ache. "We have to go soon," Daniel said apologetically. "Piano lesson at 3:30? "I understand." Victoria crouched down to Emma's level. "Thank you for spending the day with me. It made everything better." "Can I come back?" Emma asked hopefully. "Maybe not every day because school is important, but sometimes, when Mrs. Morrison can't watch me?" "Any time," Victoria said, meaning it. "You're always welcome here." Emma hugged her tightly. "You're the best almost family member ever." Almost. The word hung in the air, full of possibility and promise, and the terrifying question of what came next. They walked to the elevator together, Emma chattering about her piano lesson and how she was learning a new song that was very difficult, but she was determined to master it because that's what astronauts did. They worked hard at difficult things. In the elevator, with Emma focused on pressing all the buttons in sequence, Daniel leaned close to Victoria. "Dinner tomorrow?" he murmured. "At our place? Real dinner, not sandwiches. I'll cook." "I'd like that." Victoria's hand brushed his. "What time?" 6:30. Emma insists you need to try her famous spaghetti, which is exactly what she told you. Butter and Parmesan. Sounds perfect. The elevator reached the lobby. Through the glass walls, Victoria could see employees streaming through, some glancing over with undisguised curiosity. Tomorrow, the whispers would intensify. Questions would be asked. Eyebrows would be raised. But standing here with Daniel and Emma, Victoria found she didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them talk. She'd spent 10 years building walls and maintaining distance and convincing herself that being alone was the same as being strong. She was done with that version of herself. Emma hugged her one more time before they left, and Daniel's hand lingered on her arm for just a moment longer than professional. Then they were gone, disappearing into the afternoon crowds, and Victoria was standing in the lobby of the company she'd built, surrounded by everything she'd achieved, feeling more lonely than she had in years. Jennifer appeared at her elbow. "Your 3 o'clock is waiting in conference room B, and there are 17 messages that need responses before end of day." "Thank you, Jennifer." Victoria straightened her shoulders, pulling on the armor of composure she'd worn for so long. "I'll handle them." She turned toward the elevator, toward the work that waited, toward the empire she'd built with single-minded determination. But for the first time, the thought of returning to her office felt like a chore rather than a triumph, because now she knew what waited outside these walls, a small apartment filled with laughter. An 8-year-old who believed in Mars and drew pictures of families with misspelled labels. A man who'd loved her quietly for 3 years and was now brave enough to love her loudly. Victoria rode the elevator back to the 40th floor, looked out at the city spread below her like a conquest, and made herself a promise. She'd built this company by sacrificing everything else, by being ruthless and focused and absolutely committed to success. And she was proud of what she'd achieved. But from now on, success would mean something different. It would mean making time for dinner at 6:30. It would mean Emma's piano recitals and Sunday morning French toast and learning how to be part of something bigger than herself. It would mean being brave enough to let people in, to build a life that looked nothing like the one she'd planned but felt more real than anything she'd ever known. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emma, a picture of the rocket ship drawing, with a new addition, a flag planted on Mars that read, "Victoria and Daddy and Emma were here." Below it, a message from Daniel. "She insisted on sending you this before piano, says you need it for inspiration during boring meetings." Victoria looked at the drawing, at the 3 stick figures on an impossible journey to an impossible place, united by an 8-year-old's unshakable belief that families could do anything together. And standing in her office 40 floors above the city, surrounded by everything she'd built alone, Victoria Hale smiled and texted back, "Tell Emma I'll keep it forever, and I'll see you both tomorrow at 6:30. Don't let her put too much butter on my spaghetti. The response came immediately. No promises. Emma has strong opinions about butter ratios. Victoria set the phone down and turned to face the work that waited. Tomorrow there would be more complications, more questions to answer and policies to navigate, and professional boundaries to maintain. But tonight, she'd go home to her empty apartment and dream of a future that looked nothing like her past. And she couldn't wait. The next 6 months unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between Victoria's old life and the new one she was building. Some days the steps came naturally. Other days she stumbled badly enough that she wondered if she'd ever get the rhythm right. The Tuesday after Emma's first office visit, Victoria arrived at work to find a small gift box on her desk. Inside was a framed copy of Emma's rocket ship drawing, professionally mounted with a note in Daniel's handwriting. For when you need reminding that some journeys are worth taking even when they're impossible. She'd hung it on the wall behind her desk, and when board members asked about it during video calls, she told them the truth. It was a gift from someone important to her. Let them make of that what they would. The whispers in the office had intensified as predicted. Victoria Hale dating her former assistant was exactly the kind of gossip that fueled break-room conversations for weeks. Some people were supportive, others were skeptical. A few were openly critical, suggesting she was making a mistake that would damage her carefully cultivated reputation. Victoria had weathered worse. She'd faced hostile takeovers and aggressive competitors, and her own board trying to oust her. She could handle some disapproving looks and whispered speculation. What proved harder was learning to balance the demands of running a company with the needs of the small family that was slowly, carefully letting her in. The first dinner at Daniel's apartment had been wonderful and awkward in equal measure. Emma had indeed made her famous spaghetti with an alarming butter-to-pasta ratio, and Victoria had eaten every bite while Daniel watched with barely suppressed amusement. But halfway through the meal, Victoria's phone had rung. A crisis with a major client that required her immediate attention. She'd taken the call, stepped into Daniel's bedroom for privacy, and spent 45 minutes negotiating while Emma's carefully prepared dinner went cold. When she'd emerged, apologetic and frustrated, Emma had simply reheated her plate in the microwave and asked if the crisis was solved. No guilt trip, no resentment, just acceptance that sometimes Victoria's work demanded her attention. It was Daniel who'd pulled her aside later, after Emma was in bed, and gently suggested that maybe she could set boundaries. That not every crisis required her personal intervention. That she'd hired capable people for a reason. I know how to run my company, Victoria had said, more defensively than she'd intended. I know you do. But you're also trying to build a life outside of it now, and that requires making room. His voice had been gentle but firm. Emma understands tonight. But if this becomes the pattern, if you're always choosing work over being here, it's going to hurt her, and you. The words had stung because they were true. Victoria had spent the entire drive home that night wrestling with the reality that wanting something and actually making space for it were two different things entirely. She'd started small. Leaving the office by 6 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays to have dinner with Daniel and Emma. Turning off her phone during meals. Delegating more to her executive team. It felt unnatural at first, like walking around with a phantom limb. But slowly, painfully, she learned to let go. Emma's spring break had been a revelation. Daniel had taken the week off, planning to spend it with his daughter doing the usual routine of playdates and parks and the children's museum. Victoria, who never took time off, who hadn't had a real vacation in years, found herself requesting 3 days away from the office. The board had been stunned. Jennifer had needed to sit down. Richard had asked if she was feeling all right, but Victoria had spent those 3 days immersed in Emma's world, and it had been transformative. They'd gone to the Science Museum where Emma had explained the physics of rocket propulsion with the confidence of someone who'd watched every documentary ever made. They'd visited the planetarium and Emma had pointed out constellations like old friends. They'd made a model volcano in Daniel's kitchen that had erupted with far more enthusiasm than anyone had anticipated, covering the counters in baking soda foam. And through it all, Daniel had watched Victoria with that expression she was beginning to recognize. Wonder mixed with love, mixed with gratitude that she was here, that she was trying, that she was becoming part of their small family unit. The night after the volcano incident, with Emma finally asleep and the kitchen mostly cleaned, Daniel had pulled Victoria close on the couch. "You're good at this," he'd murmured against her hair. "At what? Making disasters in your kitchen?" at being present, at being here with us. His arms had tightened around her. I know it's not easy for you, letting go of control, making space for this. But you're doing it, and it means everything. Victoria had turned in his arms, looking up at him in the dim light. I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up, that I'll hurt Emma, that I'll let you down. You won't. But even if you stumble, we'll figure it out together. He'd kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise. That's what families do. Families. The word still felt foreign in her mouth, but it was beginning to feel like something she might deserve. By late spring, a new rhythm had emerged. Sunday dinners at Daniel's apartment had become sacred. The one time each week when Victoria's phone stayed off and her attention stayed completely on the people in front of her. Emma had declared Victoria's visits a weekly tradition and had started planning elaborate menus that usually involved far too much butter and cheese. Tuesday evenings were homework help nights, where Victoria discovered she actually enjoyed explaining algebra concepts to an 8-year-old who asked the most delightfully complicated follow-up questions. Thursday evenings were movie nights, Emma's choice of film, with popcorn made in Daniel's ancient air popper. And gradually, imperceptibly, Daniel's apartment started to feel like home in a way Victoria's expensive penthouse never had. She'd started keeping a toothbrush there, then a change of clothes. Then enough work outfits that she could go straight to the office from Daniel's place without having to stop at her own apartment first. Emma had noticed, of course. Nothing escaped Emma's attention. Are you moving in? She'd asked one evening in early June, watching Victoria hang a blazer in Daniel's closet. Victoria had frozen, the question hitting harder than it should have. She and Daniel hadn't discussed that, hadn't even approached the topic. They were still navigating the careful space between dating and something more permanent. I'm just keeping some things here, Victoria had said carefully, so I don't have to go home to change so often. But you could move in, Emma had pressed. We have room. You could have Daddy's room and Daddy could sleep on the couch, or you could share Daddy's room because you're together now, and then you'd be here all the time and we'd be a real family. Daniel had appeared in the doorway, clearly having heard the conversation. His eyes had met Victoria's, a question in them. Emma? That's a big decision, he'd said gently. Victoria has her own place. She might not want to give that up. But she's here all the time anyway, Emma had pointed out with 8-year-old logic. And I heard her tell someone on the phone that she hates going home to her empty apartment. So why not just live here with us? Victoria had felt her chest tighten. The truth was, she did hate going home to her penthouse. It felt cold and sterile after the warmth of Daniel's apartment. But moving in felt enormous. It felt like a commitment she wasn't sure she knew how to make. Let's talk about it later, Daniel had said, rescuing her from having to answer. Bedtime, kiddo. After Emma was asleep, they'd had the conversation Victoria had been avoiding. Daniel had been characteristically direct. Do you want to move in? He'd asked, sitting beside her on the couch. I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated. It doesn't have to be. His hand had found hers. Either you want to be here full-time or you don't. Either you're ready to commit to this, to us, or you need more time. There's no wrong answer, Victoria, but Emma's getting attached. If you're not sure about this, about us long-term, I need to know now before she gets hurt. The ultimatum had been gentle but clear, and it had forced Victoria to confront the question she'd been dancing around for months. What did she want? She'd spent that night alone in her penthouse, really alone for the first time in weeks, and forced herself to be honest. The apartment that had once represented everything she'd achieved now felt like a monument to everything she'd sacrificed. Success without anyone to share it with. Accomplishment without purpose beyond the next quarterly report. At Daniel's apartment, she'd found something different. Purpose in Emma's homework struggles. Joy in Sunday morning pancake disasters. Peace in falling asleep beside Daniel, his arm around her waist, his breath steady against her neck. The choice, when she finally admitted it to herself, wasn't complicated at all. She'd called her real estate agent the next morning and listed the penthouse. By the end of the week, she'd accepted an offer. By the end of the month, she'd moved the few possessions that mattered into Daniel's apartment, donated most of her furniture to charity, and officially changed her address. Emma had been ecstatic, declaring it the best day ever, and immediately rearranging the apartment to make room for Victoria's things. Daniel had been quietly emotional, helping her unpack boxes while stealing kisses when Emma wasn't looking. "Are you sure?" he'd asked for the 10th time as Victoria hung her clothes in their now-shared closet. "I'm sure." And for the first time in a long time, she'd meant it completely. The board had opinions, of course. Moving in with an employee, even a former direct report, raised eyebrows. But Victoria had stood firm. Her personal life was her own. As long as she maintained professional boundaries at work, what she did in her private time was nobody's business but hers. Richard had been the most vocal skeptic, pulling her aside after a meeting to express his concerns. "You're making yourself vulnerable," he'd said bluntly. "The board already questions your judgment after the accident. This just gives them more ammunition." "Let them question," Victoria had replied calmly. "I'm still delivering results. Q2 exceeded projections by 15%. The Henderson acquisition is ahead of schedule. My personal life hasn't impacted my performance yet. But what happens when it does? What happens when you have to choose between a board meeting and Emma's school play? Then I'll make the choice that feels right in the moment." Victoria had met his eyes steadily. "I spent 10 years sacrificing everything for this company. I'm not doing that anymore, and if the board has a problem with that, they're welcome to try replacing me." Richard had backed down, but the conversation had stayed with Victoria, because he wasn't entirely wrong. There would come a time when her two worlds would collide in ways that required difficult choices. That time came sooner than expected. Emma's school play was scheduled for the third Thursday in June. She'd been cast as the sun in their solar system production, a fitting role given her personality and her obsession with space. She'd been preparing for weeks, practicing her lines with religious devotion, insisting that Victoria and Daniel help her rehearse every single night. The same day as the play, the board scheduled an emergency meeting, a potential hostile takeover attempt by a competitor. All hands on deck. Attendance mandatory. The meeting was at 6:30. Emma's play started at 7. Victoria had stared at the calendar, feeling the weight of the impossible choice settling on her shoulders. The CEO she'd been a year ago wouldn't have hesitated. Work came first. Always. The board needed her. The company needed her. A school play was sweet, but ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of building an empire. But that CEO had also been desperately lonely and had measured success in profit margins instead of moments. She'd called Richard directly. "I won't be at the meeting," she'd said without preamble. "Victoria, this isn't optional. We're talking about a hostile takeover. I know what we're talking about. And I'm telling you I won't be there. I'll be at my daughter's school play." The silence on the other end had been profound. "Your daughter?" "Emma. Daniel's daughter. My daughter, for all intents and purposes." Victoria's voice had been steady. "I've missed enough of her life already. I'm not missing this. The board will not be pleased. The board will survive one meeting without me. You're my CFO. You're perfectly capable of handling this. I'll review everything tomorrow and make final decisions then. But tonight, I'm choosing my family." She'd ended the call before Richard could argue further. That evening, sitting in a crowded elementary school auditorium between Daniel and a row of other parents, Victoria had felt the full weight of her decision. Her phone had buzzed constantly in her purse with updates from the meeting. The takeover situation was developing. The board needed her input. Richard was fielding questions he wasn't equipped to answer, and Victoria sat there, phone on silent, and watched Emma shine on stage. The production was exactly what you'd expect from a group of 8-year-olds. Lines were forgotten. Costumes malfunctioned. Mercury wandered off stage halfway through his solo. But Emma was radiant as the sun, delivering her lines with the confidence of someone performing on Broadway, her face glowing with pride every time she spotted Victoria and Daniel in the audience. When Emma delivered her final line, "And that's how we all work together in the solar system," and took her bow, Victoria felt tears on her cheeks. Daniel's hand found hers warm and solid. "You made the right choice," he murmured. "I know." And she did. Whatever consequences waited at the office tomorrow, this moment was worth it. Watching Emma's joy, feeling Daniel's pride, being present for something that mattered in ways profit margins never would. After the play, Emma had rushed to them, costume askew, makeup smudged, absolutely incandescent with excitement. "Did you see me? Did I do good?" I remembered all my lines except the one about gravity, but I made something up and Mrs. Henderson said that's called improvising and real actors do it all the time. Victoria had crouched down, pulling Emma into a hug. You were perfect. Absolutely perfect. You really came, Emma had whispered against her shoulder. I was worried you'd have to work. I'll always come, Victoria had promised, meaning it. For the important things, I'll always be here. That night, after Emma was finally asleep, still buzzing with excitement about her performance, Daniel had pulled Victoria close on their bed. The board's going to give you hell tomorrow, he'd said. Probably. Victoria had been checking the email updates on her phone. The meeting had not gone well without her. Decisions had been tabled. The board was frustrated. Richard was diplomatically phrased in his messages, but she could read between the lines. Was it worth it? Victoria had set down her phone and looked at Daniel, really looked at him. At this man who'd loved her patiently while she figured out how to love him back, who'd shared his daughter and his life and his small apartment with her, who'd watched her transform from the untouchable CEO into someone who cried at elementary school plays. Yes, she'd said simply. It was worth it. The fallout the next day had been significant. The board had called a special meeting to discuss Victoria's priorities and commitment to the company. Several members had openly questioned whether she was still the right person to lead Hale Dynamics, if she was going to prioritize personal obligations over corporate crises. Victoria had listened to their concerns with the composure she'd cultivated over a decade of leadership, and then she'd laid out the facts. Under her leadership, the company had grown from a startup to a billion-dollar enterprise. They'd exceeded revenue targets for 12 consecutive quarters. Employee retention was at an all-time high. Customer satisfaction scores were the best in the industry. The Henderson acquisition was proceeding perfectly, and the hostile takeover attempt, the one they were so concerned about, had been successfully countered by Richard using strategies Victoria had already put in place. I'm not apologizing for attending my daughter's school play, she'd said calmly. I'm also not apologizing for having a life outside of this office. I've given this company 10 years of single-minded dedication. I've sacrificed relationships, health, and any semblance of work-life balance, and I'm done with that. One of the board members, Patricia Chen, had leaned forward. So what are you saying? That you're no longer committed to leading this company? I'm saying I'm committed to leading this company in a sustainable way. That means setting boundaries, delegating appropriately, building a strong executive team that can function without me micromanaging every decision. Victoria had met each board member's gaze in turn. I'm a better CEO now than I was a year ago. Not despite having a personal life, but because of it. I'm more balanced, more thoughtful, more strategic about where I invest my energy. And if we disagree, another board member had challenged, then you're welcome to try replacing me. Victoria's voice had been steel-wrapped in silk. But I suspect you'll find that difficult, because I've built this company into what it is today, and I'm the one with the vision to take it where it needs to go. The question isn't whether you can afford to keep me, it's whether you can afford to lose me. The silence that followed had been electric. Finally, Patricia had smiled. Well said. For what it's worth, Victoria, I think you're right. We've been so focused on quarterly results that we've forgotten sustainable leadership requires sustainable leaders. If you burn out, we all lose. She'd looked around the table. I propose we table this discussion and focus on the actual business at hand. The vote had been close, but Victoria had won. Barely. But enough. Walking out of that meeting, she'd felt lighter than she had in years. She'd drawn a line, established boundaries, chosen her family over her company's demands. And the world hadn't ended. The board hadn't revolted. The company had survived. She could do this. She could have both. The summer passed in a blur of new experiences. Emma's birthday party, where Victoria had helped organize a space-themed celebration complete with a rocket ship cake and a visit from a local astronomer. A long weekend trip to the beach where Emma had collected shells and Daniel had taught Victoria to body surf, and they'd stayed up late watching stars emerge over the ocean. Sunday dinners that became legendary for Emma's increasingly elaborate menu choices and Daniel's patient cooking instruction. And slowly, carefully, Victoria learned to be part of a family, to let people see her vulnerable, to ask for help when she needed it, to accept that she didn't have to be perfect to be loved. By August, Emma started calling her V instead of Victoria. a nickname that had emerged organically and felt like acceptance. By September, when Victoria had a particularly brutal day at work and came home to find Daniel making her favorite dinner without being asked, and Emma offering to share her dessert because sad people need extra chocolate, she realized she'd found something she'd spent years telling herself she didn't need. She'd found home. The moment that changed everything came on a random Tuesday in October. Victoria had been working from home, video conferencing with clients while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. It had become their new routine on Tuesdays. Emma would come straight home from school, and Victoria would wrap up her workday while being available for homework questions. Emma had been unusually quiet, focused on an assignment with the kind of intense concentration that usually meant she was struggling with something. "Need help?" Victoria had asked during a break between calls. "We have to write about our families," Emma had said, not looking up. "For our family tree project. And I'm stuck." "Stuck how?" Emma had finally looked up, her expression serious in that way that meant she was about to ask something important. "What should I call you? On my family tree?" Victoria's heart had stopped. "What do you mean?" "Well, you live with us. You're at all my school things. You help me with homework and come to my doctor appointments, and you're here every day. Mrs. Henderson says you're my stepmom, but we're not married, so I don't know if that's right. Madison says you're my dad's girlfriend, but that feels wrong because you're more than that. You're—" Emma had struggled for words. "You're my family, but I don't know what to call you." The question had lodged in Victoria's throat like a physical thing. What was she to Emma? Not her mother. That title belonged to Sarah, would always belong to Sarah. But not just Daniel's girlfriend either. Something more. Something she'd been too afraid to name. "What do you want to call me?" Victoria had asked carefully. Emma had thought about it seriously. "I want to call you Mom, or Mama, or something that means you're my parent too, because that's what you feel like. But I don't know if that's okay. If it's disrespectful to my real mom." Victoria had felt tears threatening and had carefully held them back. "Emma, come here." Emma had climbed into her lap, still small enough to fit even though she was growing so fast. Victoria had wrapped her arms around this little girl who'd claimed her heart without permission. "Your real mom, Sarah, loved you so much," Victoria had said carefully, "and she'll always be your mom. Nothing changes that. But I think—" She'd taken a shaky breath. "I think she'd be happy knowing there was someone else who loved you too, who wanted to take care of you and be there for you and be part of your family. So I can call you Mom? If you want to. If it feels right to you." Victoria's voice had been thick with emotion. "I would be honored to be your mom, Emma, in whatever way feels comfortable to you." Emma had hugged her tightly. "Okay, then you're Mom V, because you're you, but you're also my mom now." Mom V, the hybrid title, had been so perfectly Emma, creative and practical and full of love. That evening, when Daniel came home from work and Emma had announced the new title with pride, he'd pulled Victoria aside while Emma was brushing her teeth. "Are you okay with that?" he'd asked quietly. "Her calling you Mom?" "More than okay." Victoria had looked up at him. "Daniel, I love her. I love her so much it terrifies me. And I love you. And I never thought I'd have this. A family, people who need me for reasons that have nothing to do with business or money. But I do, and I don't want to let it go." Daniel had kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise. When he'd pulled back, his eyes had been serious. "Marry me." Victoria's breath had caught. "What?" "Marry me. Not because we have to. Not because of Emma or appearances or making things official." He'd cupped her face gently. "Marry me because I want to spend the rest of my life falling asleep next to you and waking up to your terrible morning mood and watching you help Emma with homework, even though you have 100 emails waiting. Marry me because you're it for me, Victoria. You always have been." She should have been scared, should have needed time to think, to process, to weigh the implications. But standing there in their tiny apartment, with Emma's off-key humming coming from the bathroom and dinner dishes still on the table, Victoria had felt only certainty. "Yes," she'd said simply. Daniel had laughed, surprised and delighted. "Really? Just like that? No spreadsheet analyzing the pros and cons?" "Just like that." Victoria had smiled. I spent 10 years overanalyzing every decision. This one I know in my gut. I want to marry you. I want to be Emma's mom. I want this life we're building together. He'd kissed her again, deeper this time, and they'd stood there in the small kitchen holding each other while Emma had emerged from the bathroom and immediately demanded to know what was happening. "We're getting married," Daniel had told his daughter. Emma's scream of excitement had probably been heard 3 floors down. "We're officially a family now?" We're officially a family now, Emma had asked when she'd finally calmed down enough to speak. "We've been a family for a while," Victoria had said. "This just makes it official. Can I be in the wedding? Can I wear a fancy dress? Can we have a space theme? Can we get married on the moon?" "The moon might be logistically challenging," Daniel had said seriously, "but we'll figure something out." The wedding had happened 6 weeks later, small and intimate and absolutely perfect. Just close friends and Emma, who'd served as flower girl and ring bearer and self-appointed director of ceremonies. They'd gotten married in the same elementary school auditorium where Emma had performed as the son, with the principal officiating and Emma's entire class attending because Emma had insisted her family's wedding was too important to exclude her friends. Victoria had worn a simple cream dress. Daniel had worn the same suit he'd worn their first day back at the office after the accident. Emma had worn a sparkly dress with light-up shoes and a homemade flower crown. And when the principal had asked if they took each other as partners in marriage, Victoria had looked at Daniel, this man who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who'd shared his daughter and his life and taught her what family actually meant, and said, "I do," with more certainty than she'd ever felt about anything. The reception had been in Daniel's apartment, catered by Emma's favorite pizza place, with decorations Emma had made herself. It was chaotic and cramped and absolutely nothing like the elegant wedding Victoria might have planned a year ago. It was perfect. That night, after the guests had left and Emma had finally fallen asleep still wearing her flower crown, Daniel and Victoria had stood together on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at the city lights. "No regrets?" Daniel had asked, his arm around her waist. "Not a single one." Victoria had leaned into him. "A year ago, I was alone in a penthouse measuring success in quarterly reports. Now I'm married to you, living in a 2-bedroom apartment and stepmom to an 8-year-old who wants to go to Mars. That's quite a transformation. The best kind." She'd turned to look up at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For loving me even when I didn't know how to love you back. For being patient while I figured out how to be human." She'd smiled. "For crashing into my life and refusing to let me stay alone. Technically, you crashed into my life. Car accident, remember? Best accident I ever had." They'd stood there in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. 6 months after the wedding, on a Saturday morning in April, Victoria sat in another elementary school auditorium with Daniel beside her. Emma was on stage again, this time presenting her science fair project about the possibility of sustainable life on Mars. "And that's why," Emma was saying, with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this speech 100 times, "I believe that with proper planning and dedication, humans can establish colonies on Mars within my lifetime." "Thank you." The audience applauded, Emma beamed, and Victoria felt Daniel's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining automatically. "She's going to actually do it, you know," Daniel murmured. "Get to Mars." "I know." Victoria watched Emma accept her first-place ribbon with pride. "She's brilliant and determined and absolutely unstoppable. She gets that from you. She gets it from both of us." Victoria squeezed his hand. "We make a good team." After the ceremony, Emma had rushed to them, ribbon clutched in her hand, practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see? First place. Mrs. Henderson said my research was college level, and the judges said I should consider applying to space camp this summer." "You were amazing," Victoria said, pulling Emma into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. Can we celebrate? Can we get ice cream? Can we invite Maya and her family? Can we—" "Yes to all of it," Daniel interrupted, laughing. "Ice cream, friends, celebration, the whole thing." As they walked out of the school, Emma between them holding both their hands, Victoria reflected on how much her definition of success had changed. A year and a half ago, success meant being the youngest self-made female CEO in her industry. It meant growing her company faster than competitors. It meant being featured in business magazines and invited to speak at conferences. those things still mattered. Hale Dynamics was thriving under her leadership, better than ever, actually, now that she'd learned to delegate and build a strong executive team. But success had expanded to include other metrics. Success was Emma's first place ribbon. It was Daniel's hand in hers. It was Sunday morning pancakes and homework help in school plays. It was coming home to people who loved her not for what she'd accomplished, but for who she was. It was measuring her life in moments instead of profit margins. That evening, with Emma finally asleep after hours of celebration, Victoria and Daniel sat together on the couch in their apartment. The same couch where Victoria had first admitted she'd heard his confession. The same couch where they'd watched countless movies with Emma. The same couch where they'd planned their wedding and discussed Emma's future and built a life together, one conversation at a time. "Happy?" Daniel asked, pulling her close. Victoria thought about the question. A year and a half ago, she would have defined happiness as closing a major deal or exceeding quarterly projections. She would have said she was happy in her penthouse apartment, alone with her success. She would have been lying to herself. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "I spent so many years thinking I had to choose between success and a personal life, that I couldn't have both, that wanting both was weakness. And now? Now I know that's not true. I'm a better CEO because I'm also a wife and a mother, because I have people who remind me there's more to life than work, because I have a reason to leave the office and come home." She turned to look at him. "You saved me, Daniel, from becoming someone I wouldn't have recognized, from measuring my entire worth by my net worth." "You saved yourself," Daniel corrected gently. "I just gave you a reason to try. We saved each other then." "I can live with that." They sat there in the quiet apartment holding each other while the city hummed beyond their windows. In the morning, Victoria would go back to being a CEO. She'd handle crises and make decisions and continue building her company into something great. But tonight, and every night after, she'd come home to this. To Daniel and Emma and the beautiful, chaotic, perfect life they'd built together. A year and a half ago, Victoria Hale had been trapped in a wrecked car, listening to a confession she was never meant to hear. She'd been alone and successful, and convinced she had everything she needed. She'd been wrong. The most important success wasn't something she'd built in a boardroom or negotiated in a conference call. It was here, in a modest two-bedroom apartment, with a husband who'd loved her before she knew how to love herself, and a daughter who believed they could all go to Mars together. Victoria closed her eyes, Daniel's arms around her, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete. The crash that had started everything had broken open her carefully constructed world. But from those broken pieces, she'd built something infinitely more valuable than an empire. She'd built a family. She'd built a home. She'd built a life worth living. And as she drifted towards sleep, safe and loved and exactly where she belonged, Victoria Hale smiled. Because sometimes the best journeys were the ones you never planned. The impossible ones. The ones that required you to let go of who you thought you had to be and become who you were meant to be all along. Sometimes the greatest success was simply finding the courage to love and be loved in return. And that, Victoria thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was worth more than all the quarterly reports in the world.